The graft was rejecting the wrong way. Reconstructionist Sale Ordin had watched 1,000 myosinth grafts settle into place, and every one of them failed when it failed, by dying. The engineered muscle would go gray at the margins, lose its charge, and slew off the bone like wet cloth. That was rejection. That was the shape of failure he had been trained to read since he was a larva in the teaching wards of the Isafar order. What he was watching on the deep tissue monitor above the surgical cradle was not that. The graft in the human's right thigh was being pushed out, not dying, evicted. "Adept," said the graft tech, Core Vust, and his voice had the flat carefulness of someone who did not want to be the first to say a thing out loud. "The integration margin is retreating." "I see it." "It's retreating at—" Vust stopped. His lower hands moved across the readout and came back with a number he clearly did not believe, 0.4 millimeters per minute. Sale did not answer at once. He stood over the open surgical field, all four of his hands still, and looked at the thing the death-world body was doing to his work. The human lay in the cradle with his right leg open from hip to knee, the great sheet of the outer thigh peeled back and pinned, the femur a pale spar in the wound. Sale had spent the first hour of this procedure removing what a cargo clamp had done to the young man on a mining moon 3 days out from here, removing it because it could not be saved. The quadriceps group had been crushed to paste and bone chips. The long muscle that runs the front of the thigh, that lifts the knee and holds a body upright, had simply ceased to exist as muscle. Sale had cut the ruin away, cleaned the bed down to living tissue, and laid in a myosinth graft grown to the exact dimensions of the loss. A slab of engineered muscle, cultured from a template proven across 200 client species, keyed to accept human nerve signal and human blood. Standard work. Elegant work. He had closed the vascular junctions himself and watched the graft pink up as the patient's own circulation took it. That had been 40 minutes ago. Now the graft was a hand's width smaller than when he had laid it in, and shrinking, and at the margin where his engineered muscle met the human's own surviving tissue, something was climbing. "Magnify the boundary," Sale said, "full depth." Monitor bloomed. At cellular resolution, the border between graft and native tissue should have been a quiet seam, a slow, orderly zone of integration where the client's body accepted the gift and grew into it. Instead, the seam was a front. The human's own muscle, the surviving edge of it that Sale had trimmed and thought inert, was throwing out new fiber into the graft bed faster than the monitor's tracking overlay could keep a line on it. Where the new native fiber met the myosynth, it did not blend. It undercut. It grew beneath and around the engineered muscle and lifted it off the bone, and the graft, having nowhere to anchor, was being shed. Sale had been a reconstructionist for 60 years. He had never seen a client's body reject a graft by outbuilding it. "Suppress the proliferation," he said. "Local field, half dose." Vust's hands hesitated over the console. "On a fresh reconstruction, if we suppress the margin, the graft won't take either." "The graft is not taking, half dose." The suppression field was a mercy the order used to calm tissue that healed too hot. Some client species scarred so aggressively that a wound would wall itself off before it could knit, and a light suppression let the knitting win. It was routine. It was gentle. Sale had used it 10,000 times. Vust laid the field over the wound and stepped back, and for a moment the front stopped. For a moment. Then it came on again, and the tracking overlay lost the line entirely, and the number on the proliferation gauge, the number that on a healthy client sat near 2, that on the fastest healing species in the Concord's registry sat near 9, climbed past 40 and kept climbing. "That's through the suppression," Vust said. He was not carefully flat anymore. "Adept, that's straight through it, it didn't even." "I can read the gauge." Behind him, the theater door cycled, and Sale did not need to turn to know who it was. The prime physician of the Isafar reclamation ward walked into a room the way weather walked into a valley. Otha Vresh was old even by Asuni reckoning. her upper arms gone the translucent silver of great age, her 4 eyes hooded, and she had run this ward above the gas giant Kell for longer than Sale had been alive. She stopped at the foot of the cradle and looked at the monitor, and at the wound, and at the number. "You called a graft failure," she said. "I called a graft failure," Sale said. "It isn't one." She came closer. Asuni's surgeons did not crowd a field, and she did not. She stopped at the exact distance that let her see without breathing on the work, and she watched the front climb for the length of 6 breaths, and Sale watched her watch it, and he saw the thing he had never once seen in Otha Vresh cross the old silver of her face. She did not know what she was looking at either. "The client," she said, "Voral grade 9. Something moved in her hooded eyes. Voral grade 9 was near the top of the hazard index the Conquered kept for the worlds it drew clients and specimens, and occasionally soldiers from a scale that ran from placid garden worlds at the low end to a handful of biospheres, so lethal the Order's field teams were forbidden to make planetfall without a warden escort. Grade 9 meant a world where the local life had spent its whole evolutionary history trying to kill everything else that lived on it, and mostly succeeding. It meant a body built by that world. Sale had known the number going in. Every reconstructionist knew to read the hazard grade before cutting. He had read it and thought nothing of it, because the myosynth graft was proven, and a proven graft did not care how dangerous a client's homeworld was. "When did the margin turn?" Otha said. 40 minutes post-anastomosis. It pinked up, it took circulation, and then the native edge began to build. "Build." "Outbuild," Sale said. "It is outbuilding my graft prime. It is shedding it the way a body sheds a splinter." On the cradle the human stirred. He should not have stirred. He was under a standard sedation load, the dose scaled to his mass and metabolism off the same registry that had grown the graft, and a client under that load did not move for 4 hours. Sale saw the young man's hand close, the far hand, the one not strapped for the vascular lines, and open, and close again, the way a sleeper's hand does when the sleep is going thin. "His sedation is failing," Voss said. "His sedation is not failing," Otha said quietly. "It is being metabolized." The word sat in the cold air of the theater. Metabolized. Burned through. The human's body was eating the drugs meant to keep him under as fast as the lines could deliver them, the same way it was eating the suppression field, the same way it was eating Sale's graft. "Increase the load," Sale said. "To what?" said Vust. "I'm already at the ceiling for his mass. If I go past it, I stop his heart." "Then hold at the ceiling and prepare to close. If he's coming up, we take the field down before he surfaces on an open wound." They worked. Asuni's surgeons were fast, and this ward was the best in the Kell system, and Sale's hands did what 60 years had made them able to do without asking his mind for permission. He clamped, he sealed. He laid the peeled sheet of the human's thigh back over the wound, back over the graft that was still there, still being lifted, and the native front that was still climbing under it, and he began to close. And while he closed, he watched the deep tissue monitor and understood, with the slow cold that came over an Asuni in the presence of a thing outside its training, that he was not closing over a reconstruction. He was closing over a fight, and his side was losing it. "Get me a histology sample off the native margin before we seal," Otha said. "Full panel, and flag the case to the threshold desk." Vust's upper hands went still. "The threshold desk, prime, that's a hazard." "I know what it is." The threshold desk was not a medical office. It was the Conquered's Hazard Classification Bureau, the same body that wrote the Voral Index and cleared field teams for planetfall, and on rare and ugly occasions, ordered a specimen contained or a ward sealed. A reconstructionist did not flag a case to the threshold desk. A reconstructionist repaired a body and sent it home. To flag the ward's own surgical case to the Hazard Bureau was to say, In the flat institutional language the conquered used for such things, we may be looking at something that is not a patient. Sale sealed the last vascular junction and set his lower hands flat on the edge of the cradle and looked at the young man's face. He was ordinary. That was the thing Sale kept returning to in the hours and days that followed when he tried to explain to the threshold desk and to the ward review and eventually to a council of his own order what he had seen. The human was ordinary, not large, not armored, not built like the warrior castes the conquered fielded from the middle grades of the index. A young man, lean, with the dirt of a mining moon still faint in the creases of his knuckles where the pre-surgical scrub had not quite reached, a scar on the jaw older than the injury, short dark hair matted where the cradle held his head. Nothing about him said predator. Nothing about him said the top of a hazard index. He looked like what he was, a salvage-rigger, 24 of his world's years old, who had gone into a collapsed cargo bay on a mining moon to pull 2 of his crew out from under a fallen clamp, and had gotten his own leg under it doing the pulling. His crew had lived. Sale had read that in the intake file. The human had crawled out on his own, on a leg that no longer worked, dragging the second man, and had told the moon's clinic to treat the man first. "Close the field," Otha said. "Wake him." "Wake him," Sale repeated. "He's coming up regardless. I would rather he came up to a physician than to a strap in a machine. Wake him." And Sale, she looked at the monitor one more time at the number that had not stopped climbing even now, under the sealed skin in the dark of the closed wound. "Do not tell him anything is wrong. Watch his face when we tell him the surgery is done. I want to know what a grade 9 does when it thinks it has been fixed." They brought him up. It took a long time, longer than waking should take, because there was almost nothing left in his blood of the drugs that had put him down. His body had spent them. He surfaced the way a diver surfaces all at once, eyes open and already moving, taking in the curved white ceiling of the theater and the daylight coming down through the dome above it. Kell's great banded face filled half that dome, and the light of the system's star came off the planet's cloud tops and filled the theater with a flat, bright glow that threw no shadows. He took in the 4 Asuni around him, tall and pale and four-armed, and he did not flinch. Sale marked that. Most first-contact clients flinched. "You're awake, Mr. Marsh," Otha said in the trade tongue, her voice pitched to the register the order used with clients, warm, slow, certain. "The surgery is complete. You did very well." The human Marsh looked down the length of himself at his own right leg, sealed now under a dressing field, and then back up at the ring of physicians, and Sale watched his face the way the Prime had asked him to. There was no fear in it. There was no relief in it. There was a flat, patient attention that Sale had no category for, the look of a man reading a weather report about a storm he had already decided to walk through. "How long was I under?" Marsh said. 6 of your hours. Feels shorter." He flexed the far hand, the one that had woken first, and looked at the leg again. "You put something in it, the leg. I can feel it not being mine." The theater went very quiet. Sale had closed that wound with his own 4 hands. There was a full dressing field over it, and beneath the dressing a sealed incision, and beneath the incision the graft and the native front and 8 centimeters of the young man's own flesh. And there was no possible way, none that the order's physiology of the human recognized, for the patient to feel, 6 minutes out of sedation, the specific foreignness of an engineered muscle he had never known was there. "You can feel it," Otha said carefully. "I can feel it," Marsh said. He was not alarmed. He said it the way a man says there's a stone in my boot. "It's cold, not temperature cold. It doesn't." He searched the trade tongue for a word and didn't find it and settled. "It doesn't answer. When I go to move the leg, most of it answers and a piece in the middle just sits there. Like a dead spot. What is it?" Sale found that all 4 of his eyes had gone to the deep tissue monitor, though the wound was sealed and the monitor showed only the closed field. He knew what it showed under the field. He had watched it climb. "It's a graft," Sale said, before the Prime could shape a gentler answer, because the young man had asked a straight question and something in Sale would not give a grade 9 a soft one. The muscle in your thigh was destroyed. We could not repair it. We replaced it with engineered tissue. What you feel as a dead spot is the graft. In time your body will grow into it and it will answer like your own. Marsh looked at him for a moment. It was the first time the human had picked one of the 4 physicians to look at, and he had picked Sale, and Sale felt the attention as a physical thing, cool and complete, the way you feel a scanning beam pass over your hull. "No, it won't," Marsh said. "I'm sorry. It won't grow into it." The human said it without heat, without argument, the way a man states the tide. "It's not mine and it doesn't fit and my leg knows it. My leg's already working on it." He shifted his weight in the cradle, testing, and Sale saw the great muscles of the thigh move under the dressing field, saw them move in a way that no thigh 6 minutes out of a total reconstruction had any business moving. "Give it a couple days. It'll sort itself out." "Mr. Marsh." Otha's voice was still warm, still certain, but Sale had known her 60 years and he heard the thing that had come into it underneath. "The graft is a permanent replacement. Your own muscle in that region is gone. It cannot regrow. That is not how the body works. Any body." The human smiled. It was a small smile, tired, not unkind. The smile of a man being told a thing about his own house by a guest who has visited once. "Doc," he said, "it's how mine works." And on the deep tissue monitor, under the sealed field, in the dark of the closed wound, the number that measured how fast the human's own flesh was building climbed past 60, and did not stop. They kept Eli Marsh in a recovery bay on the ward's 3rd ring, a bright glass-walled room that looked out and down onto Kell's banded weather, and Sale Ording did what he had told himself for 60 years a reconstructionist did. He watched the reconstruction. The order's protocol for a myosinth graft was a known thing, printed in the manuals every larva learned before they were allowed to hold a blade. Days 1 through 3, the graft sat quiet while the client's circulation established. Days 4 through 10, integration began at the margins, slow and orderly, a millimeter or 2 of true blending. By day 30, the seam was gone and the graft answered the nerve. By day 90, no scan could tell the engineered muscle from the born muscle around it. That was the promise the conquered sold, and it was a true promise. Sale had kept it 200 times. Eli Marsh broke the protocol on the first night. Sale was not in the bay when it happened. He was in the histology suite 2 rings up, standing over the sample Otha had ordered pulled from the native margin, and he was there because the histologist, an old careful Asuni named Del Maroon who had read tissue for the ward for 90 years, had called him up at the 3rd watch and said, over the ward channel, in a voice Sale had never heard him use, "Adept, come and look at this, and tell me I have contaminated the sample, because if I have not contaminated the sample then I do not understand what I am looking at." The sample sat under the deep scope, lit and magnified, and Del Maroon stepped back from it so that Sale could put his eyes to it, and Sale looked at 8 centimeters of human muscle fiber taken from the edge of a 3-day-old crush injury, and he understood why the old histologist's voice had shaken. The fiber was building new architecture. Muscle in every client species the conquered had ever repaired was a finished thing. It grew in the young and then it was grown. When it was injured it patched, laid down scar, sometimes thickened with use, but it did not redesign itself. What was under the scope had redesigned itself. The fibers at the injured margin were not the fibers Sale had trimmed. They were denser. They were laid in a tighter weave, and the weave was not the human's normal weave. Del had a healthy human reference sample beside it for comparison, pulled from the intake bloodwork archive, and the two did not match. The new fiber had more mitochondria per unit than the reference by a factor Del had measured 3 times. It had thicker sheathing. And running through it, threaded into the new native weave like wire into rope, were fibers Sale knew, because he had grown them. "That's my graft," Sale said. That is your graft, Delmarune agreed. It is not being rejected, adept. Look at the junctions. It is being disassembled and the material is being taken up into the native fiber. The body is not shedding your myosynth. It shed the parts it could not use and it is eating the rest. It is using your engineered muscle as feedstock. Sale stood very still over the scope. He thought of the young man on the cradle saying it'll sort itself out, and the flat patient certainty of it, and he understood, standing in the histology suite at the third watch above the banded weather of Kel, that he had made a category error of a kind an Asuni physician was not supposed to be able to make. He had looked at a body from the top of the hazard index, and he had treated it like a body. He had brought his best work, proven, elegant, kept 200 times, to a system that did not need it and could not be made to keep it, and the system had accepted his work the way a foundry accepts scrap, gratefully, and only as raw material for something it intended to build itself. Pull the deep tissue log from the recovery bay, Sale said. The overnight, I want the proliferation gauge. Delmarune pulled it, and they put it on the wall, and they watched the line of the night. It did not plateau. On every client the order had ever healed, the proliferation gauge rose after injury and then fell as the healing finished a hill, a curve, a body doing its work and then stopping. Eli Marsh's line went up in the theater and it had not come down. Through the first night it climbed, and where it should have leveled off as the wound closed it instead found a new slope and climbed that, and near the fourth watch, for reasons the log gave no cause for, it doubled. Something changed at the fourth watch, Sale said. What changed? Delmarune checked the bay record. Nothing changed, he was asleep. The night staff logged him asleep and stable the whole watch. The histologist paused, reading further, and his upper hands went still. He woke once. Fourth watch. He asked the night nurse for food. She logged it as odd and gave him a nutrient ration, and he ate it and went back to sleep. He asked for food. He asked for a great deal of food, Del said. 3 rations. The nurse's note says he told her the leg was hungry. Sale looked at the line on the wall, the line that had doubled at the fourth watch. At the exact watch the young man had woken and eaten, and told a nurse his leg was hungry and gone back to sleep, and he felt the cold of the histology suite settle all the way into him. The body was not fighting the graft. The body was not even inconvenienced by the graft. The body had a project, and the injury and the graft were merely the raw materials it had been handed, and it was building, at a rate the order had no gauge tall enough to measure, something that had not been in the young man's leg before the cargo clamp fell, and it was doing this while its owner slept, and woke only to ask politely for more to build with. I'm going down to the bay, Sale said. It's the third watch, he's asleep. Then I'll watch him sleep, Sale said. The Prime wanted to know what a grade 9 does when it thinks it's been fixed. It doesn't think it's been fixed, Del, it thinks it's been fed. The recovery bay was dim for the night cycle. The dome above it stepped down to a soft glow, and Kel hung in the glass wall like a lamp that never went out. Eli Marsh slept on his back with his ruined leg out straight, and the night monitor beside the cradle drew his heart and his breath in quiet green, and everything about the room said healing patient except the one gauge Sale had come to see. The proliferation reading, 3 watches after a total reconstruction, sat at a number that on any other client would have meant a tumor. Sale stood at the foot of the cradle and did not wake him. He watched the dressing field over the thigh, and after a while, because he was a surgeon, and a surgeon's eye finds motion the way a predator's does, he saw it. The great flat sheet of muscle on the front of the thigh, the region he had emptied and filled with graft, was moving. Not twitching, building. Slow, steady, a swelling and settling under the field that had the rhythm of something being assembled, and Sale thought, standing there in the dark, of the yards above Isafar where the order grew its grafts in tanks, the slow, patient accretion of cultured fiber, and he understood that he was watching the same process run inside a sleeping man at a speed his tanks could not touch. "You're the cold one," Marsh said, without opening his eyes. Sale did not startle, Asuni did not startle, but it took him a breath to answer. "You're awake." "I sleep light in new places." The human opened his eyes and found Sale in the dark without searching, the way he'd found him in the theater. "You're the one who told me straight, the graft, the dead spot. The others talk to me like I'm a kid who fell off a wall. You told me what you did to my leg. I appreciate it." "I told you the truth about a permanent replacement," Sale said, "and you told me it would sort itself out." "And," Marsh's mouth moved, not quite a smile, "how's it look on your machines, Doc?" Sale considered the young man in the dim bay, the flat, patient eyes, the leg quietly building itself in the dark, and made a decision that the ward review would later spend a full session deciding whether to censure him for. He told the truth again. "It looks," Sale said, "like your body is taking my graft apart and using the pieces to build something that was not in your leg before. It looks like a process that should have stopped by now and has instead doubled. It looks like nothing in 60 years of my practice or 2 centuries of my order's records, and if you feel it as a dead spot getting warmer, then what you are feeling is the largest reconstruction failure I have ever presided over, and I do not have a name for it. That is how it looks on my machines." Marsh was quiet for a moment. Then he laughed, a short, tired human sound with no cruelty in it. "That's not a failure, Doc," he said. "That's just Tuesday." "I don't know that word." "It means it's ordinary. It means it happens all the time and nobody up here'd know because you don't come down where we live." Marsh shifted, testing the leg, and Sale saw the whole thigh answer the small motion, more of it answering than 3 watches ago, the dead middle smaller. "You want to know about my body? I'll tell you about my body. When I was 9, I broke this same leg in 2 places falling off a loader, set wrong, grew back crooked. My old man rebroke it with a pipe wrench on the kitchen floor because the colony clinic had a 4-month wait and it healed straight, and it's carried me 20 years since. That's not tough. Down where I'm from, that's a Thursday. Everybody's got a story like it. We break and we knit, and the knit comes back harder than the break, because the ones that didn't come back harder for aren't around to have kids." He looked at the dark ceiling. "You built my world into me before you were ever born, Doc. Every bug that tried to kill my great-grandmother and didn't. Every winter. Everything with teeth. I'm what's left after all of that had to go. My leg doesn't care what you put in it. It's got a plan, and the plan is older than your order." Sale stood in the dark and had no answer, and the human, having said the truest thing anyone would say about the whole affair, closed his eyes and went back to sleep, and his leg went on building in the glow of the planet that was not his. Morning imaging told the rest. Othavresh convened the ward's senior physicians in the deep scan suite at first watch, and they put Eli Marsh into the full-body cradle and ran the imaging, the order kept for its hardest reconstructions, and the images came up on the wall 3 meters tall, and 8 of the best physicians in the Kell system stood in the bright daylight of the scan dome and looked at what a single Deathworld night had done. The graft was almost gone. Where Sale had laid a hand's-breadth slab of engineered muscle, there remained a thin, bright lattice, and even as the imager watched it in real time, the lattice was thinning, its material drawn out fiber by fiber into the native muscle that had grown up around and through it. And the native muscle was no longer the muscle a cargo clamp had left. It had rebuilt the entire quadriceps group, not to the dimensions of the healthy reference but past them. The whole front of the thigh was denser than the man's other leg, packed with the tight new weave Del Maroon had found under the scope, threaded with more vessel and more nerve. And where it anchored to the bone, it had laid down new attachment that the imager's overlay flagged, in the flat orange of an instrument reporting something outside its parameters, as structure not consistent with baseline human anatomy. "It's not repairing him," said the diagnostician Asil quietly. "It's improving him against the injury. It has treated the wound and the graft as the same problem, and solved both by building a better leg than the one he came in with. "Reconstructions do not do that," said one of the junior physicians, a bright young Asuni named Ian who had assisted Sale on 40 grafts. She said it the way a child says the sun does not go out, as a law, as a thing the universe had agreed to. Tissue heals to baseline. It does not exceed baseline. There's no signal to tell it to exceed baseline. Where is the signal coming from? "There is no signal," Del Maroon said from the back of the room. "That is what I have spent the night failing to explain. There is no growth signal driving this. I have looked for the marker of every proliferative pathway in the Concord's library, and I find them all quiet. The fiber is building without a chemical instruction to build. It is as if—" The old histologist stopped and chose his words with the care of someone laying stones over a drop. "As if the instruction is not chemical. As if it is structural. As if this tissue, injured, simply knows the shape it is supposed to become and becomes it, and does not require to be told." "Then we stop giving it material," Sale said. They all turned to him. "The histology is clear," Sale said. "The process runs on feedstock. It took my graft as feedstock. It took 3 nutrient rations at the 4th watch as feedstock. The patient told a nurse his leg was hungry and the gauge doubled within the watch. Whatever drives it, it cannot build from nothing. It obeys conservation. So we starve the margin. We hold his nutrition to maintenance. We suppress the local vasculature to limit delivery to the site, and we deny the process the material it needs to exceed baseline. We cannot stop it wanting to build. We can stop it having anything to build with." Otha Vresh looked at the 3-meter image of a leg that had improved itself past the anatomy of its own species, and then she looked at Sale, and something in the old silver of her face was almost like grief. "Do it," she said, "and when it fails, reconstructionist, I want you to remember that you were the one who understood soonest what we are dealing with, and it still will not be enough." They starved the margin. It was, Sale would think afterward, the most careful cruelty he had ever administered. They held the young man's nutrition to bare maintenance, enough to keep a body alive, not a grain more, and they laid a vascular suppression over the whole upper leg to choke the blood that carried building material to the site, and they watched the proliferation gauge, and for the first time since the theater, the line bent. It slowed. It did not stop, but it slowed, the slope of it easing as the process ran out of the material it needed, and in the deep scan suite the physicians allowed themselves the small, cold satisfaction of an intervention that worked, and Ian said, "It's responding," in a voice that wanted very badly for the universe to still obey its laws. Then Eli Marsh, on the 3rd day, stopped eating the rations they brought him, and asked for water instead, a great deal of water, and began to lose mass. Sale saw it on the morning way and did not understand it, and then he did, and the understanding was worse than not understanding. "He's feeding it himself," Sale said in the Prime's office with the door sealed. "We cut off delivery to the site so the leg had nothing to build with, so it's taking the material from the rest of him. He's catabolizing his own body to supply the leg, his other muscles, his fat stores. He's losing half a kilo a day and every gram of it is going into that thigh." Sale set the weigh log on the Prime's desk. "We didn't starve the process, Prime. We just told it where to get its groceries. It's eating him to build itself, and he's letting it, because on some level below thinking, his body has decided the leg matters more than the rest of him. And it's right, because the leg is the thing his world is trying to make him into, and the rest is just supply." Otha Vresh read the weigh log. "If we let this continue, he will consume himself. If we stop starving the margin, we go back to it eating our grafts and our drugs and doubling in a watch," Sale said. "And if we do nothing, he catabolizes to death building a leg he doesn't need, because the injured leg is already stronger than the good one. Every option we have accelerates the thing we're trying to stop. We are not treating this patient, Prime. We are feeding it options." That was the morning the threshold desk answered the flag. They sent a warden. Sale had seen threshold wardens twice in his career, both times at a distance, and both times he had been glad of the distance. They were not physicians. They were the hard edge of the Hazard Bureau, the ones who went to the worlds too dangerous to draw specimens from and decided what came off those worlds and what stayed and what was burned in place. And they wore the Bureau's gray, and they did not speak the warm, slow client register the medical order used. The one who came to the Isafar ward was named Vol Threshold Kest. Wardens took the Bureau's name in place of a house, a thing that told you all you needed to know about what the Bureau asked of them. And it was of a lineage Sale did not recognize, low and broad and plated where the Asuni were tall and pale, with 4 flat eyes that took in the recovery bay in a single sweep and rated everything they landed on. Kest read the file standing up. It read fast. When it finished, it looked through the glass wall at Eli Marsh, who was sitting up in the cradle drinking his 8th liter of water and looking back at the warden with the flat patient attention he gave to everything. And Warden Kest said to Otha Vresh, in the gray flat bureau tongue, "You have a Voral 9 actively exceeding its own baseline in a sealed ward, and you have been feeding it." "We have been treating a patient," Otha said. "You have been treating a specimen and calling it a patient, and that error is why the Bureau exists." The warden did not raise its voice. Wardens did not have to. "Prime Physician, I am not here to insult your order. Your order heals. It is very good at healing, and its instinct in the presence of a broken body is to mend it, and that instinct is correct 900 times in 1,000. But you drew a body off the top of the index, and you brought it into a sealed environment, and you cut it open, and you gave it every resource it asked for. And now, it is doing the one thing the index is written to warn you about, which is adapting, in real time, past the parameters of its own species, in response to being handled. Do you understand what you have made?" "Tell me," Otha said. Her voice was very cold now. Sale had never heard her cold with a colleague. "You have made it learn that being injured makes it stronger," Warden Kest said. "That is the lesson every grade 9 world teaches its life, and it is the lesson your ward has just taught this individual on the cellular level, with your grafts and your drugs and your careful starvation, each of which it has treated as one more predator to grow past. Every intervention you have tried has been received by that body as an attack, and it has answered every attack by improving. You are not its physicians. You are, as far as its flesh is concerned, its environment. And it is winning against you the way its ancestors won against everything its world could throw, which is by refusing to stop building until whatever is trying to shape it gives up first." The warden turned its flat eyes on the recovery bay again, on the young man drinking water. "The Bureau's protocol for a grade 9 adapting under handling is containment and cessation. Stop touching it. Give it nothing. Seal the ward, and observe from behind glass exactly how far it goes when it has no enemy left to grow past, because that number, Prime Physician, is the only piece of medicine left in this room worth having." Through the glass, Eli Marsh set down his water and swung both legs off the cradle, both, the ruined one and the whole one, and put his bare feet on the cold floor of the recovery bay and stood up. He was not supposed to be able to stand. He was 4 days out from a total reconstruction of the load-bearing muscle of his right leg, on a leg they had been imaging that morning, and the ward's own protocol said he would not bear weight for 3 weeks. He stood on it anyway easily, and he took his weight onto the injured side and the leg held, and Sale watched through the glass as the young man tested it, a small bend, a small rise, the way a man tests ice, and found it good. Then Eli Marsh looked through the glass, directly at the ring of physicians and the gray warden watching him, and he did the thing that Sale Ording would remember for the rest of his life, longer than the histology and the imaging and the 3-meter picture of an improved leg. He put his weight fully onto the leg they had rebuilt, and he smiled, and he said through the glass, loud enough to carry in the trade tongue, "Told you it'd sort itself out." The ward was sealed on the 5th day. Sale did not agree with the sealing, and did not fight it. He understood the warden's logic, which was the same logic he had reached himself, one step further along. Every touch was fuel, so stop touching. The order pulled its instruments back from Eli Marsh's leg, took down the vascular suppression, restored his nutrition to whatever he asked for, and left him alone in a glass-walled bay on the third ring with a monitor watching from the ceiling and no hand laid on him. Containment and cessation. Give it no enemy and record how far it goes on its own. For 2 days it did almost nothing. That was the first thing that broke Sale's understanding of the case a second time. The moment the order stopped intervening, the proliferation gauge fell not to 0, but to a low, steady hum, the reading of a body doing ordinary maintenance. The leg finished. The whole quadriceps group came in dense and complete and anchored. The new attachment structures settled. The last thread of Sale's dissolved graft was taken up, and then the tissue simply stopped building and held, the way a foundry banks its fires when the order is filled. It plateaued, Ian said, watching the flat line on the wall on the 7th day, and there was relief in it and also something like disappointment. The disappointment of a young physician who had begun, against her training, to want to see how far the impossible thing would go. It reached a new baseline and it stopped. It's not a runaway. It's not a tumor. It knew when to quit. It knew when the job was done, Sale said. That's worse. Worse than a runaway. A runaway is a mistake. A body that doesn't know when to stop is broken, and a broken thing you can fix. Sale looked at the flat line, the line that had climbed past every gauge the order owned, and then, the instant it had built what it meant to build, laid itself down and went quiet. This isn't broken. This is a system operating exactly to design. It escalated precisely as far as it needed to answer the injury and the graft in our starving, and then it stopped, on its own, with no signal to stop, because the design says grow past the thing that hurt you and then live. It is the single most disciplined biological process I have ever observed, and it is running inside a man who dragged himself out of a cargo bay on a broken leg and told the clinic to treat someone else first. That discipline is not a symptom. It's who he is all the way down. They imaged him again on the 7th day, and the leg they had rebuilt was, by every measure the ward could take, better than the leg he had walked in on. Denser fiber, more vascular, more efficient at the cellular level than any human tissue in the Concord's archive. The injured leg was now the strong leg, and the healthy leg, the one no clamp had crushed, the one no surgeon had touched, was, by comparison, ordinary, weaker, the unimproved one. That's the finding, isn't it? Azil said quietly, in the scan suite, looking at the 2 legs side by side on the wall. That's the thing the whole galaxy would want off this ward if it knew. We spent 2 centuries growing muscle in tanks and selling it as the finest reconstruction in the Concord, and this species does it better, faster, and past baseline, with no tank and no template and no surgeon, using nothing but injury and food. We have been selling handcarts to a world that builds engines when you kick it. Then we understand it, Otthavresh said. She had been silent through most of the 7th day. We understand the mechanism, we replicate it, we make it a therapy, and we give the galaxy a reconstruction that exceeds baseline. That is the medicine in this. That is worth every hour of it. She turned to Del Maroon. How close are you to the mechanism? The old histologist did not answer for a long moment. I am not close, he said. I have the what. I do not have the how, and I am beginning to believe the how is not a thing I can take out of him and put in a vial. The signal is not chemical prime. I have looked. There is no growth factor to isolate, no gene to lift, no protein to synthesize. The instruction to build past baseline is written into how his tissue is organized, at a level below the parts I can extract. It is written the way a fold is written into a sheet of metal, in the whole shape and not in any piece of it. I can no more bottle it than I can bottle the folding. To have what he has, you would have to be built the way he is built, and to be built the way he is built you would have to have been made by his world, and his world took 4 billion years and killed everything that came out wrong. Del Marun looked at the Prime with the flat honesty of the very old. You are asking me to package the outcome of 4 billion years of a slaughterhouse. I can describe it. I cannot sell it. Then we describe it exactly, Otha said. And we take one more sample, a deep one from the finished tissue, now that it has plateaued and is stable, and we characterize the architecture completely while it is quiet before we lose the chance. Sale felt the cold come into him before the words were fully out. Prime, he said, don't. She looked at him. It plateaued because we stopped touching it, Sale said. The warden's whole protocol is that every touch is fuel. If you take a deep sample from finished tissue, you are not characterizing a quiet system. You are injuring it. You are giving it exactly the one thing it is built to answer. It will not experience your biopsy as a measurement. It will experience it as the next predator. And it will do to your biopsy what it did to my graft, except this time it is not starting from a crush injury and a slab of engineered muscle. This time it is starting from a leg that already beat all of that, and it will grow past whatever a biopsy does the way it grew past everything else, from a higher floor. We take shavings from patients every day, reconstructionist. You have never taken a shaving from this patient, Sale said. Ask the warden. They asked the warden. Vol Thresholdkest listened to the proposal in the gray flat bureau tongue, and its 4 flat eyes did not move, and when the Prime had finished it said only, the bureau's protocol is cessation. You are proposing the opposite of cessation and asking me to approve it as research. I will not approve it. I will also tell you that you will do it anyway because your order cannot leave a wound unexamined any more than that man's leg can leave a wound unhealed, and the two of you are going to teach each other a lesson neither wants. It turned to go and stopped at the door. When you take your sample, take it small, and have him told first. That one does not like being handled without being told. I have watched him for 2 days. He forgives being cut. He does not forgive being cut in silence. They told him. Sale was the one who told him, because Sale was the only physician on the ward Eli Marsh would talk to at length, and because Sale had asked to be the one. He went into the sealed bay in a clean field and sat on the stool beside the cradle, and he told the young man straight, the way he had told him everything. The order wanted a deep sample from the finished leg, to understand how it worked, and Sale believed the sample would re-trigger the process from a higher floor. And he had said so and been overruled, and he was telling Marsh now because Marsh deserved to hear it from a physician and not feel it as a blade in silence. Marsh listened. He was eating when Sale came in. He ate more than any 3 Asuni still, even with the leg plateaued, and he kept eating while Sale talked. And when Sale finished, he set the ration down and thought about it, and Sale watched the flat patient eyes turn inward the way they did. Let me make sure I've got it, Marsh said. The leg's done, it's better than it was, everybody agrees. And now you want to cut into the done, better leg, to find out how it got done and better. And you already know, you specifically, the cold one, you already know that cutting into it is going to wake the whole thing back up and make it worse for me. Which means bigger. Which means my leg eats more of your science and more of my dinner, and takes longer to settle. Also, your order can write a paper it can't sell anyway because your old histologist already told you nobody can bottle 4 billion years. He picked the ration back up. Do I have it? You have it exactly, Sale said. You people are something else. It was not an insult. It was almost admiration, the admiration of a man for a strange machine. You cut a healed man to study healing. He chewed. Here's my counter. You want to know how it works? Stop cutting, stop poking. Leave me be for a month, feed me, and at the end of it I'll walk out of here and you can watch me walk, and that's your data, a man who came in with his leg in a bag walking out on it stronger than he came. That's the whole paper. Healthy human left alone gets better than new. You don't need my insides for that. You've got my outside and my outside's going to walk. The order will take the sample regardless of your counter, Sale said. I can't stop it. I could only make sure you heard it first. Marsh nodded slowly. Then take it, he said, but you take it. Not the young, eager one, not the old, careful one. You. Because you're the only one in this whole shining place who's told me the truth every time, and if my leg's going to treat the cut like a war, I want the cut made by the one person here it might have a reason not to. He lay back. And when it goes exactly the way you told them it would, Doc, and it will, I want you to remember you called it and they cut anyway. Whatever happens after, that's on the order, not on my leg. My leg's just doing what legs do where I'm from. Sale took the sample himself on the 9th day in a clean field, with the whole senior staff and the gray warden watching through the glass. He took it small, as the warden had said. A deep core from the center of the finished quadriceps, 4 millimeters, sealed and drawn in a single clean motion, the kind of sample he had taken 10,000 times. The young man did not flinch. He watched Sale's 4 hands work with the flat, patient attention he gave everything, and when the core was drawn and the tiny wound sealed under a field, he said, "That's it." And Sale said, "That's it." And for 1 hour the ward believed it had gotten away with it. Then the proliferation gauge, which had lain flat and quiet at maintenance for 2 days, came off the floor. It did not climb the way it had climbed the first night. Sale, watching from the scan suite, understood within the first watch that Marsh had told him the plain truth, and he had told the Prime the plain truth, and they had all watched it happen anyway. The process was not restarting from the crush injury. It was starting from the finished leg, from the improved baseline, and it was treating Sale's 4 millimeter core, a wound smaller than a thorn, as the newest predator to grow past, and it was answering a thorn with the full weight of a system that had already beaten a cargo clamp and a graft and a starving. By the second watch, the gauge was past where it had peaked on the first night. By the third watch, the young man had asked for food, a great deal of food, and eaten it, and the leg had begun to lay in a second dense layer over the first, and Del Maroon, reading the new tissue on the scope, said in a voice gone very quiet, "It's not just rebuilding the core site. It's revising the whole leg. It has decided that if a wound this small could be inflicted, the leg was insufficiently finished, and it is finishing it again, denser, at a scale that assumes larger wounds are coming." He looked up from the scope. "We did not sample the leg, we insulted it. And it is answering the insult by preparing for a war none of us are going to fight." Sale stood in the bright scan suite above the banded weather of Kell, and watched the gauge climb toward a number the ward had no line tall enough to draw, and thought about a young man on a mining moon telling a clinic to treat someone else first, and understood that the order had just taught a grade 9 body the one lesson the warden had begged them not to teach it. That even here, even in the safest and most careful place in the Kell system, surrounded by physicians whose whole art was mending, it was not safe. It would be cut, and the only answer to being cut that its 4-billion-year design recognized was to become something that the next cut could not touch. "Prime," Sale said, over the ward channel, not taking his eyes from the gauge. "You wanted the mechanism. Here is the mechanism. We just gave it to ourselves. It doesn't heal to baseline. It heals to whatever would have survived the thing that hurt it, and now we've taught it that the thing that hurts it is us." The Reclamation Board sent an administrator up from Isafar on the 12th day, and that was when the case stopped being medicine and became property. Sale knew the moment he saw the transport dock. The board did not send administrators to bedsides. The board was the commercial spine of the order, the body that licensed the hyacinth graft to 200 client species, that priced it, that defended the patent that had made the Isafar order the wealthiest medical house in the Kell arm. And the board did not travel unless something threatened the thing that made the money. And the thing that made the money was the promise, printed on every license, that a hyacinth graft was the finest muscle reconstruction in the Concord, and that nothing a client's own body could do would ever match it. Eli Marsh's right leg was, at that hour, a standing disproof of that promise, growing denser by the watch. The administrator was named Sethric Vaylor, a slate-purple noble of the coastal houses, tall even for an Asuni, robed in the deep green the board wore, and he came onto the ward with 2 aides and a legal adjutant, and the particular unhurried certainty of someone who had never in his life been the least powerful person in a room. He did not go to the bedside. He went to the Prime's office, and he had Haute Havresh's own senior staff assembled to hear him, and he stood before the wall where the 2 legs still hung 3 meters tall, the improved leg and the ordinary one, and he looked at the disproof of his product for a while, and then he told them what was going to happen. "This case does not leave the ward," Sethric said. "Not as data, not as a paper, not as a word spoken to a colleague on another station. The individual in the bay is now the subject of a proprietary reclamation study under board seal. He is not a patient. He is not, whatever the Warden's Bureau would like, a specimen for the hazard index. He is an asset of the Isafar order, and he will remain on this ward under study until the board understands what his body does and how the order can own it." "He is a client," Otha said. "He came to us with an injury. We are obligated to return him healed." "He is healed," Sethric said. "You have said so yourselves. His leg is better than new. Our obligation is discharged the moment we choose to say it is, and I am choosing. From this point he is not receiving care. He is providing a service, and the service is his body, and the board will compensate his salvage guild handsomely for the loan of it." He turned from the wall. "Prime Physician, I have read every report off this ward for 12 days, including the reconstructionists. A flat purple eye found Sale and moved on, dismissing him, including the reconstructionists' alarmism. And here is what I see that none of you, buried in your histology, have let yourselves see. You are frightened of a treasure. This man's tissue does the one thing our entire industry has failed for 2 centuries to make tissue do. It exceeds baseline, permanently, in response to injury, with no rejection and no tank and no cost but food. If the order could bottle 1% of what that leg does, we would not sell reconstructions. We would sell improvement. Every soldier in the conquered, every laborer, every noble who wished to be stronger than he was born. The hyacinth graft would be a footnote. That is not a hazard, Prime. That is the largest single asset the Isafar order has ever had lying in a bay drinking water, and you have spent 12 days trying to make it hold still instead of trying to own it." "You cannot own it," Del Maroon said from the back in the flat, tired voice of the very old. "I have told the Prime and I will tell the board. The mechanism is not extractable. It is written in the whole and not in the parts. You cannot bottle 4 billion years of a killing world." "You cannot bottle it," Sethric agreed, unbothered. "Yet, you are one histologist who has worked one case for 12 days. The board will bring 100 and every instrument the order owns and however long it takes, and it will start by keeping the source of the data where the data is." He gestured to his adjutant, who laid a sealed order on the Prime's desk. "Quarantine. Class tissue hazard, indefinite, board authority. He does not leave the ward. Not to his guild, not to his world, not to the surface. If the Bureau objects." The purple eyes went, at last and deliberately, to the gray warden standing silent by the door. "The Bureau may file its objection through the usual channels and wait the usual years." Warden Vole Threshold Kest had not spoken since the administrator came onto the ward. It spoke now. "The Bureau does not object," Kest said. Sale turned. So did the Prime. Sethric's certainty flickered, just slightly, because a warden agreeing was not a thing the board had planned for. "The Bureau does not object," Kest said again, in the gray flat tongue. "Because the Bureau has read the same 12 days you have, administrator, and reached the opposite conclusion, and your quarantine serves the Bureau's conclusion as well as yours, so I will not waste a filing fighting it. You believe you are keeping a treasure where you can mine it. I believe you are keeping a grade 9 adaptive organism in a sealed environment with 100 physicians about to injure it 100 new ways in the name of study. And I believe that every one of those injuries will teach it precisely what this ward has already taught it in 12 days, which is that it is surrounded by things that cut, and that the answer to being surrounded by things that cut is to become the thing that survives being cut by them." You want to make it hold still and be mined. It does not hold still. Its entire design is the refusal to hold still. You are not going to own it, administrator. You are going to spend the order's fortune teaching it, cut by cut, exactly how dangerous it needs to become to leave. And then, when it is dangerous enough, it will leave and it will not ask you. Kest's flat eyes did not blink. The Bureau does not object to your quarantine. The Bureau is going to write down that you were warned and by whom and on what day. That is the only medicine left in this room, and I intend to take good notes. There was a silence in the Prime's office, then that Sale felt in the plates of his own chest. Sethric Valor recovered his certainty. Nobles of the coastal houses did not lose it for long, and he said coldly, "Take your notes, Warden." And he turned to the staff, and he began to assign the study. Teams, instruments, a schedule of samples and provocations and controlled injuries designed to map exactly how the tissue answered each kind of insult. A program of cutting a man to learn how he refused to stay cut. And Sale Ording stood in the bright office above the weather of Kell and listened to the richest medical house in the arm plan to do to Eli Marsh, methodically, over months. The precise thing the young man's whole body had spent 4 billion years learning to make lethal. Somebody should tell him, Sale thought. He went to tell him. The bay was bright with the flat shadowless light off the planet, and Marsh was sitting up, the finished leg out straight, the small core wound from the 9th day already gone under a fresh dense weave, and he was watching the transport dock through the glass wall where the administrator's ship still sat. And when Sale came in, Marsh said without turning, "That's the money, isn't it? The green ship. That's not a doctor. Doctors don't dock like that." "That's the board," Sale said, "the commercial authority of the order. And they've decided I'm not a patient anymore." Sale was quiet for a moment. Then, because he had told the young man the truth every time and would not stop now, "They've decided you're an asset. There is a quarantine order. You are not permitted to leave the ward. The board intends to study what your body does to keep you here, and to injure you in controlled and various ways, and to record how you answer each injury, for as long as it takes to understand the mechanism well enough to sell it." The warden objected in principle and declined to fight it in practice. "The Prime is being overruled. I am telling you because you should hear it from a physician, and because I am, at this point, the only one who will say it plainly." Sale sat on the stool. "You are, as of this hour, a prisoner of my order, Mr. Marsh. And they are going to spend a fortune cutting you to learn why you don't stay cut." Eli Marsh finally turned and looked at him, and the flat, patient eyes had something new in them. Not fear. Sale had never once seen fear in them, but a kind of settling. The look of a man who has been waiting to find out which way a thing would break and has just found out. "Okay," Marsh said. "You understand what I've said." "I understand it fine." He looked back out at the green ship. "They're going to keep me. They're going to cut me to study me for as long as it takes." He was quiet a moment. "You know what happens where I'm from when a thing decides it's going to keep cutting you until it gets what it wants. You stop being polite about the leg." He said it without heat. He said it the way he said everything, flat and patient and certain. The way a man reads a tide he has read 1,000 times. "I came up here hurt and I've been a good patient. I let you knock me out. I let you put your fake muscle in me. I let you starve me and choke my leg off and take your core. And every time I told you the same thing, which is it'll sort itself out, and it did. And I was polite about it because you were trying to help. That green ship isn't trying to help. That green ship's decided I'm a mine." He looked at Sale. "You've been square with me the whole way, Doc, so I'll be square with you. You go back and you tell your money that they've got a window, a short one. While I'm still thinking of this as a hospital and them as rude, there's a window where they can open that door and let me walk to transport and go home to my guild, and nobody up here ever has to find out what my leg does when it stops thinking it's healing and starts thinking it's fighting. That window's open right now. Every cut they take closes it. And when it shuts," he shrugged, an easy human roll of the shoulders, "it won't be my leg that decided. It'll be them. My leg just does what legs do where I'm from. It grows past whatever's trying to end it. Right now, the thing trying to end me is a cargo clamp, and it's already won that. You give the money one more thing to grow past, Doc, and you'll find out my leg was never the strongest muscle I've got. It was just the one that got hurt first. Sale sat on the stool in the bright bay and understood that the young man had just told him, plainly and without threat, the exact shape of what was coming. The way he had told them in the theater it'll sort itself out and been right. The way he had told them the Corps would wake it and been right. I'll tell them, Sale said. They won't listen. The window will shut. I know, Marsh said and turned back to the glass. It always does. You go on and tell them anyway. I like that about you. You tell people true things you know they won't hear. Where I'm from we call that being a doctor. Up here I think you're the only one left doing it. Sale carried the message back to the Prime's office, and he delivered it exactly, word for word, in the flat register Marsh had used, and Administrator Sethric Valor heard the young man's warning relayed by a reconstructionist, and did the thing that the richest and most certain do with warnings. He priced it. He's negotiating, Sethric said. Every asset negotiates when it realizes it's an asset. He's telling us there's a cheap price, let me walk, and threatening an expensive one. That is not a Deathworld mystic reading a tide, reconstructionist, whatever your histology has done to your nerve. That is a laborer from a poor world discovering he's valuable and trying it on. The answer to a negotiation is not to fold. The answer is to begin so he understands the shape of what refusing costs. He turned to the study lead. First provocation on the schedule. Tomorrow, first watch. Standardized incision, dorsal aspect, opposite leg, the untouched one. I want to see if the response is local to the injured tissue or systemic. Map it. The untouched leg, Sale said. The untouched leg, Sethric said. We know what the right leg does. I want to know if the left one has been listening. And Sale Ording, standing in the bright office, thought. So do I, and he was, for the first time in 60 years of practice, afraid of the answer his own order was about to purchase. They cut the untouched leg at first watch on the 13th day, and the left leg had been listening. Sale was in the scan suite when the study team made the incision, a clean standardized cut dorsal aspect of the left thigh, a wound the order could have made in its sleep, and he watched the proliferation gauge on the left leg, the leg no clamp had crushed and no surgeon had ever touched, come off the floor within the first minute. Not slowly, not from baseline. It came up the way the right leg had come up on the 9th day after the core sample, from a higher floor, fast, already braced, as if the tissue had been standing ready. It's systemic, Asil said, very quietly, reading the twin gauges. The left leg is answering a first-ever injury the way the right leg answers a 100th. It didn't have to learn. It already knew. The lesson the right leg learned, that injury here means grow past it, is not stored in the right leg. It's stored in him. The whole body has updated. Every muscle he has is now running the improved program, and the left leg just proved it by skipping straight to the escalation the instant it was cut. On the wall, the two gauges climbed together. How? Said Ian. She had stopped pretending to be a physician observing and become a young person watching a law she believed in dissolve. There's no messenger. We looked. There's no signal in the blood that carries a lesson from one muscle to another. How does the left leg know what the right leg went through? Because it isn't a lesson passed between legs, Del Maroon said. The old histologist had come up from the sample suite and stood before the wall with his upper hands folded, and he spoke the way a man speaks at the edge of a thing too large to hold. We keep looking for a message because we are physicians and we think in signals and doses. There is no message. There is a threshold. His body maintains a running account of the worst thing that has happened to it, and it builds every tissue to survive that worst thing plus a margin. The cargo clamp raised the account. The graft raised it. Our starving raised it. Our core sample raised it. And every time the account rose, every tissue in his body quietly re-rated itself to the new worst case. Not just the leg that was hurt, all of it, because his world does not injure one muscle at a time. His world injures the whole animal, and the survivors are the ones whose whole animal answered. We did not cut a fresh, untouched leg this morning. We cut a leg that has been revising itself, in silence, for 4 days, against a war it correctly predicted we were going to start. He looked at the administrator who had come to watch his study bear fruit. You asked whether the left leg had been listening. It has been doing more than listening, administrator. It has been preparing. You did not discover the systemic response this morning. You confirmed a preparation that was already complete. Sethric Valor looked at the twin climbing gauges and, to his credit, or to the depth of his certainty, did not flinch. Then the asset is even larger than modeled, he said. A systemic effect. Not a leg that improves, a body that improves wholesale against a rising threshold. Do you understand what that is worth? His purple eyes shone with it. We have been thinking too small. We do not want to bottle a muscle. We want to bottle the threshold, the account. If we can learn how his body keeps its running worst case and re-rates its tissue to beat it, we do not sell reconstructions or even improvement. We sell adaptation itself. A soldier who becomes harder every time he is wounded. A body that cannot be defeated by any injury it survives, because surviving is the trigger to become proof against the next. That is not a therapy. That is the end of the injury as a category. He turned to the study lead, and his voice was almost tender with greed. Escalate the schedule. I want the full map of the systemic response. Multiple sites. Varied insults, thermal, chemical, mechanical. I want to know the ceiling. I want to know how high his account will go before it stops and what it builds at the top, and whether we can hold him at the top long enough to read it. Administrator, Sale said. You have a remark, reconstructionist. You always have a remark. You are asking how high his account will go before it stops, Sale said. I can tell you that it does not stop. It plateaus when you leave it alone at the current worst case plus a margin. It does not have a ceiling that is a property of his body. It has a ceiling that is a property of how badly you hurt him. Every insult on your escalated schedule raises the account, and his whole body re-rates to beat the new account plus a margin, and then you raise it again, and it re-rates again, and there is no top to find because you are the thing setting the height. You are not going to map his ceiling, administrator. You are going to build it. And you are going to build it, insult by insult, into a young man who has told me twice plainly that his leg was never his strongest muscle. It was only the one that got hurt first. The gauges climbed. Sethric said, note the reconstructionist's remark for the record, and did not answer it and gave the order to escalate. They spent 4 days building Eli Marsh's ceiling. Sale refused to take part in the provocations, and the board let him refuse because a reconstructionist declining to injure a patient was, on the paperwork, a smaller problem than the reconstructionist would be if forced, and because Sethric had 100 other hands. But Sale was not permitted to leave the ward. No one was. The quarantine sealed the physicians in with the asset, and so he watched. He watched the study team work through its schedule of insults on a young man who lay in the bright bay and let them, and who ate everything they brought and asked for more, and who never once raised his voice. The tissue answered everything. They burned a patch of his shoulder, and the shoulder came back in 3 days denser than the muscle around it, and faintly warmer to the touch. The vessels beneath it multiplied to shed heat. The whole region re-rated against fire. They introduced a controlled toxin into a muscle of his back, a compound that in any other client would have caused a wasting necrosis, and the muscle isolated it, walled it, metabolized it, and rebuilt over the site with fiber that Del Maroon's scope showed carried new structure at the cellular level, structure that, when the team tested it, proved resistant to the toxin at 10 times the original dose. They stressed a muscle in his forearm to tearing under load, over and over, the way the body's own exercise tears and rebuilds, but at a scale and speed no exercise could reach. And the forearm answered by becoming, within days, visibly, measurably stronger than a human forearm had any right to be, cabled with dense new fiber. Until the young man could close his hand on the ward's diagnostic grips and drive the readout past the ceiling printed for the strongest client species the order had ever tested. And the whole time, the running account rose, and his whole body re-rated to the account, and Eli Marsh got quietly, systemically, comprehensively stronger, not in the injured places but everywhere, because his body had understood days ago that the injuries were not random accidents but a campaign, and a campaign against the whole animal is answered by improving the whole animal. "He's not healing anymore," Del Maroon said on the 16th day in the scope suite to Sale, the two of them alone. "I want to be precise because precision is all I have left. In the first days his body healed, it repaired damage and exceeded the repair. That is finished. He has no unrepaired damage. They cannot injure him faster than he rebuilds. What his body is doing now is not healing. It is arming. It has concluded, from 16 days of evidence, that it exists in an environment that will injure it in escalating and varied ways for as long as it remains, and it is building an animal that can survive that environment, every muscle denser, every tissue proofed against the last insult and braced for a worse one. The whole system re-rated upward on a rising account with no top. The board asked for the ceiling. The old histologist looked up from the scope with his hooded ancient eyes. The ceiling, adept, is whatever it takes to walk out of a place that will not stop cutting you. And they are raising it toward that number themselves, one cut at a time, and they cannot see that the closer they push it to the top, the closer they push it to the exact strength required to leave over their objection. Sale went to the bay that night. Marsh was sitting up in the flat, unending light off the planet, and there were 16 days of study written on him now, not as wounds. There were almost no wounds. They closed too fast to see, but as change. He was leaner in the places the tissue had catabolized for material and denser everywhere it had built, and there was a stillness to him that had deepened, the stillness of a thing that has stopped bothering to conserve patience because it has more than it will need. He looked at Sale and Sale looked at him, and for a moment neither spoke. "How's my account?" Marsh said. He'd learned the word from the ward channel or from the way the physicians talked around him as if he were furniture. The old careful one. He talks about my account, my running worst case. Where's it at? "High," Sale said. "Higher than any client the order has recorded. And rising because they have not stopped and will not stop, because the administrator believes that at the top of your account there is a thing he can bottle and sell. And every day you do not break confirms to him that the top must be higher, so he climbs." "And what happens at the top, Doc, in your professional opinion?" There was no mockery in it. The young man genuinely wanted the physician's read. "When they get my account all the way up, what's my body building for at the top?" Sale thought about it honestly, the way the young man had earned. "For the worst thing that could happen to you in this place," Sale said. "Your body keeps a running account of the worst injury and builds to survive it plus a margin. They have spent 16 days teaching it that the worst thing that happens here is being cut, burned, poisoned, and torn, on a schedule, by physicians, with no end. So it is building an animal that survives physicians. And there is only one way an animal survives a place full of things that will cut it forever, Mr. Marsh, and it is not by getting better at being cut." Sale's voice was very level. "It is by becoming the thing in the room that the cutting stops for." Eli Marsh nodded slowly, as if Sale had confirmed a figure he'd already carried. "That's about where I've got it too," he said. "My leg's been doing the math longer than your machines have. It knows what it's building for. It's been building for it since the green ship docked." He looked out at the transport bay, where the green ship still sat, and then back at Sale. "You want to know the strangest part, Doc? I'm not angry. I keep waiting to be angry and it doesn't come. Where I'm from, anger's a thing you can't afford. It makes you stupid and slow and it gets you killed. So it got bred out of us mostly, the anger, and what's left where the anger used to be is just this." He tapped his own chest, over the sternum, over the dense re-rated muscle underneath. "Patience. and knowing exactly what you're going to do, and doing it when the time comes cold once and not before. My account's going to top out in a day or two. When it does, I'm going to get up, and I'm going to walk to that green ship's dock, and I'm going to leave. And I'd like it very much, Doc, if when that happens you're standing somewhere else, because I've got no account against you. You told me true things the whole way, but I'm not going to be able to be careful about who's in the room. Not at the top. On the 17th day, the administrator went looking for the top of the account the fast way, and the ward learned that there was no fast way, only a steeper cost. Sethric Valor had grown impatient with the schedule. The graded provocations, the burns, the toxins, the controlled tears, were mapping the systemic response in careful increments, and careful increments took time, and the strength readings kept climbing without arriving anywhere the administrator could point to and call a ceiling. So he did what the certain do when patience fails them. He skipped ahead. He ordered a single provocation calibrated not to injure and observe, but to overwhelm, a compound insult, mechanical and chemical at once, delivered to a major muscle of the young man's back at a dose that in any client the order had ever treated would have crossed from injury into destruction. A wound the body could not be expected to answer, because the body would be too busy failing. If there is a ceiling, Sethric said in the scan suite, watching the study team prepare it, it is the point at which his response can no longer keep pace with the damage. We have been feeding him injuries he can easily beat. Feed him one he cannot, and either we find the limit of the response or we confirm there isn't one. Either result is worth having. Proceed. Administrator, Del Marun said. He did not rise from the scope. He had stopped rising for the board somewhere around the 15th day. You are describing an attempt to injure him faster than he can rebuild. I will tell you what will happen, so that it is in the record before it happens and not only after. He will not fail to keep pace. His body does not experience a large wound as a different category from a small one. It experiences it as a higher entry on the account, and it answers a higher account by building higher, and a wound calibrated to overwhelm him will not overwhelm him. It will instruct him. You will not find the point at which his response cannot keep pace. You will find the point at which you have taught his body that the enemy is now willing to deal wounds meant to kill, and it will re-rate against wounds meant to kill, and every tissue he owns will arm against lethality itself, which is a great deal worse for this ward than any of the small lessons you have taught it so far. Do not do this to find a ceiling. There is no ceiling. There is only a man you are about to teach that the room means to end him. Sethric said, proceed. And they proceeded, and Del Marun was right in every particular, and it was worse than he had said. Sale watched it from the scan suite, and he watched the young man take a wound that should have destroyed the muscle of his back, a wound the readouts flagged, in the flat orange of instruments reporting the end of their scale, as beyond survivable tolerance for the tissue involved, and he watched the young man's body not be destroyed. The proliferation gauge did not climb the way it had climbed for the burns and the tears. It detonated. It came off its floor and went past every line the ward had drawn and kept going into a region. The gauge simply reported as a solid bar. No number. The instrument's way of saying more than I can count. And the muscle of the young man's back, which should have been dying, began instead to rebuild at a rate that made everything the ward had seen in 16 days look like preamble. It's answering a lethal insult as a lethal threat, Asil said, and his voice had gone thin. Del's right. It's not just rebuilding the back. Look at the systemic gauges, every one of them just stepped up. The burn sites, the tear sites, the old core, all of it just re-rated again, all at once higher, because the body just learned the enemy will use killing force, and it's arming the whole animal against killing force. We didn't find the ceiling, administrator. We just raised the account by the largest single step of the entire study, and we did it on purpose, and now every muscle he has is proofing itself against death. Through the glass, Eli Marsh lay on his front while the muscle of his back rebuilt beneath a dressing field, and he did not cry out, and he did not thrash. And when the worst of it had passed and the field had sealed over new dense tissue that had not been there a watch before, he turned his head slowly and found the observation glass, and found Sale behind it among the physicians, and he said something that the Bay's pickup caught and carried to the scan suite in the flat, bright silence. "That one was meant to kill me," Marsh said. "He was not asking. The others were tests. That one was meant to end it. You can tell. My body can tell." He was quiet a moment, his cheek against the cradle, his back rebuilding. "You want to know the thing about a wound meant to kill, Doc? Where I'm from, that's the wound that graduates you. The little ones you heal, you go on, you stay about the same because the world's just keeping its hand in. But the one that's meant to finish you, the one that would have finished anyone softer, that's the one your body takes to heart. That's the one it never forgets. Everybody I know who's worth knowing has one. A day the world tried all the way to kill them and missed, and after that day they were different, harder, cold in a place they weren't cold before." His eyes did not leave the glass. "Your money just gave me mine. Up here in the cleanest room I've ever been in on purpose to find out how high I go. I want you to make sure that's in whatever you write. Not that I got hurt. That somebody up here decided to kill me to see the number, and my body wrote it down, and my body doesn't forget the ones that were meant to finish it. Neither do I." Sale carried that to the Prime, and the Prime carried it to the Administrator, and the Administrator, reviewing the readings from the lethal provocation, the detonated gauge, the systemic step, the whole animal arming against death, reached at last the edge of his certainty, though he did not yet fall off it. The response to a lethal insult is qualitatively larger than the response to a survivable one, Sethrick read aloud, from the study summary in the Prime's office. A discontinuity, below a threshold of damage, incremental arming, at or above the threshold, the point where the insult could plausibly end him, a systemic escalation of a different order entirely. He looked up, and for the first time Sale saw the greed in the purple eyes contend with something colder. That is the most valuable finding of the study. It means the effect can be triggered to its maximum deliberately, by threatening the subject's life, rather than mapped slowly by degrees. If we can reliably invoke the lethal threat response. "You are describing," Ottavresh said, very quietly, "a program of repeatedly attempting to kill him in order to harvest the strength that attempting to kill him produces. On a subject who has just told this ward, through the observation glass, that his body does not forget the wounds that were meant to finish it, and neither does he. You have found the discontinuity, Administrator. You have also found the exact line past which he stops being a patient who is enduring you and becomes a man who is counting. He said the word himself. He is counting. And the account he is keeping is no longer only in his tissue." Sethrick said, "He is one man in a sealed ward," and did not yet understand, and gave the order to plan the next lethal provocation for the 19th day. And it was to prevent that provocation as much as to keep the asset that he moved up the stasis, and ordered the young man frozen on the 18th day instead, one day before the ward would have tried, a second time and deliberately, to kill him. It was the freezing that topped the account. But it was the 17th day, the day the order chose to kill him to read a number, that set the top's height, that taught a body from a killing world that the cleanest, kindest, most skilled room it had ever been in had, in the end, decided to finish it, the same as every other thing that had ever tried, and would have to be answered the same cold way. Sale understood that only later, laying the days side by side for the Bureau. The doors on the fifth ring did not open because a restraint field burned out. They opened because on the 17th day the Isafar order graduated Eli Marsh the way his own world graduated its hard young, and his body did what bodies from that world did with a graduation, which was keep it cold forever, and act on it once precisely, when the time came. And the time came on the dock, and he did the least it took, and went home carrying the 17th day inside him the way he carried the leg, and the winter, and every other thing the galaxy had tried to end him with, and only made him more. The board decided to freeze him on the 18th day, and that was the injury the young man's body had been keeping the top of its account against. Sale learned of it in the Prime's office, where the study leads had gathered to hear the administrator's next instruction, and the instruction was not another provocation. Sethric Valor had done his own arithmetic, and it had frightened even him, though he would not have used the word. The strength readings had crossed a threshold that made him nervous about the quarantine holding. The young man had driven the diagnostic grips past the ceiling for any client, had answered every insult by arming, and there was a limit to how strong an asset the board wished to keep behind a door that a physician could open. So Sethric had chosen the oldest solution of the powerful to the problem of a valuable thing that might leave. He would stop it from moving. Full metabolic stasis, Sethric said. The order uses it for long transport of critical cases. It halts the body, all of it, every process down to a crawl. He cannot arm what he cannot metabolize. We freeze the account where it stands, we keep the asset at its current value, and we study a still subject at our leisure instead of a rising one we cannot catch. It is elegant. It solves the strength, the quarantine, and the pace of the study in one intervention. Prepare the stasis cradle. Administrator, Ottavresh said, and her voice was the coldest Sale had heard it in 60 years. He has metabolized every sedative we own. His body burns our drugs as fast as we deliver them. Stasis is a chemical process. What in the last 18 days gives you the slightest confidence that a body which eats our anesthetics will hold still for our stasis? Stasis is not an anesthetic, Prime. It does not ask the body's permission. It halts the metabolism itself. It halts the metabolism with a metabolic agent, Del Maroon said from the back, in the flat, tired voice that had stopped being deferential somewhere around the 16th day. You cannot halt a body's chemistry except through its chemistry, and his chemistry has spent 18 days learning to grow past every chemical you introduce. Administrator, I will say this once plainly, so that it is in the record in my words and not only the reconstructionists. You are about to hand his body the worst injury on its account, not a cut, not a burn. You are about to attempt to stop him, wholesale, permanently, every process at once, which is the one thing his 4-billion-year design is built above all else to survive, because a grade 9 world's every predator is, in the end, a thing that tries to stop you. His body has re-rated against cuts and burns and toxins because those are the insults you have shown it. Show it stasis. Show it the attempt to halt the animal entirely, and it will re-rate against that. And there is only one tissue outcome that survives an attempt to halt the whole animal, Administrator. It is an animal that cannot be halted. You are about to build it, on purpose. And call it elegant. Sethric Valor looked at the old histologist for a long moment, and Sale saw the certainty in the purple eyes flicker at last, not break. The coastal houses did not break, but flicker, the way a lamp flickers when something heavy passes near the wire. Prepare the stasis cradle, Sethric said. They prepared it. Sale watched them prepare it, and he watched Ottavresh stand at the wall with the 2 3-meter legs behind her, the improved and the ordinary, and he watched the oldest and best physician in the Kell system make the calculation that a lifetime in the order had trained her to make, the calculation of when an instruction from the board became a thing a physician could not lend her hands to, and he watched her reach the end of it. I withdraw the ward's cooperation, Otta said. This is no longer a medical procedure. It is the restraint of a sound-bodied client against his will for commercial study, over the objection of the ward's senior staff, the histologist of record, and the reconstructionist who understands the case best. The Isafar orders physicians will not lay hands on him for this. If the board wishes to freeze a man to keep him, the board's own people will carry it out, and the board will own it. Noted, Sethric said, unmoved and overruled. The quarantine is board authority. I have my own people. He gestured, and the 2 aides who had come up with him on the green ship, not physicians, Sale saw now, had never been physicians. Larger plated, the private hands the board kept for the moving of valuable things went to prepare the young man. Sale got to the bay first. He was not supposed to. The quarantine sealed the physicians from the asset except on the study schedule. But Sale Orden had spent 18 days being the one physician on the ward Eli Marsh would talk to, and the bay's door read his hand out of long habit, and he went in ahead of the board's plated men, and he found the young man already standing. Marsh was up, on both legs in the flat bright light, and he was not looking at Sale. He was looking at the door and past it, toward the transport dock, and there was in his whole body a settledness that Sale had no word for in any tongue he knew, not tension. Tension was a thing that waited to be released, and this had nothing left to wait for. It was the stillness of a decision that had already been made and only had not yet been done. "They're coming to freeze me," Marsh said. "It was not a question. I heard the word on the channel, stasis. They're going to try and stop me, all of me, at once." "Yes. That's the one," Marsh said, quietly, almost to himself, almost gently. "That's the top of the account. I've been feeling it come. My legs known what it was building for since the green ship docked, and I couldn't have told you the shape of it, but my body could, and now they've gone and named it. Stop the animal. That's the worst thing there is, where I'm from. Everything that ever tried to kill me was, in the end, a thing trying to make me stop." He looked at Sale at last, and the flat, patient eyes were, for the first time in 18 days, entirely without patience, not because the patience had broken, but because it was finally, precisely, used up, spent to the last on the exact thing it had been saved for. "You remember what I asked you, Doc, 2 days ago, about where you'd stand?" "I remember," Sale said. "Then go and stand there." It was not a threat. It was the last kindness of a man who had run out of everything except the one thing he had been built to do. "You've been square with me the whole way. I've got no account against you. But they're about to hand my body the worst thing it's ever been shown, and my body's going to answer it the way my world taught it, and I won't be able to be careful. Go stand somewhere else, and take the old careful one with you, and the eager young one, because they never cut me either. Take the doctors who didn't want this out of the room. Leave me the ones who did. My body'll sort out the difference. It always does." He turned back to the door, where the plated men were coming through now, stasis cradle rolling ahead of them, and he said the last thing he said to Sale Orden as a patient, in the trade tongue, flat and cold, and without a grain of anger in it. "Tell your money I gave at the window. Tell it I was polite as long as being polite was true. And tell it—" The door opened, and the board's men came in with the cradle, and Eli Marsh set his weight down onto the leg they had rebuilt, the leg that had started all of it, the leg that was no longer the strongest muscle he had. "Tell it my leg was only ever practice." The board's men were good at their work. They had moved valuable and unwilling things for the coastal houses for years, and they came in fast and low with the stasis cradle, and a restraint field already up, a field rated to hold the strongest client the order had ever catalogued, the same field that had held a berserk warrior caste noble through a 6-hour transport. They put it on him, and Sale, backing to the wall as the young man had asked, saw the field take hold, saw Eli Marsh stop mid-step as the restraint locked his body in the air the way it was designed to. And then he watched the field lose. It did not fail like a machine. It failed like a rope. The young man's arm came up against the restraint, slow at first, and the field's readout Sale could see it on the cradle, the same orange overload flag the imager had thrown on the first day, climbed and screamed and climbed, and the arm kept coming, because 18 days of a rising account had built a body that generated more force than any client the field was rated for, and the field had been rated for clients, and this was no longer, in any sense the order's instruments could measure, a client. The restraint that had held a warrior caste noble held Eli Marsh for the length of 4 breaths. Then the emitters redlined, and the field guttered, and the young man's arm finished its arc into the open air of the bright bay, free, and he set his other foot down, out of the dead cradle, and stood loose and whole in a restraint field that was now only heat and a warning tone. The board's men reached for their sidearms. "Don't," Sale said from the wall in the trade tongue, loud to the men and to the young man both, though he knew already that neither would hear it and that it did not matter, because the thing in the bright bay was past the reach of any word. "Don't. It only makes him." They fired. Sale would spend a long time afterward trying to describe to the ward review and the bureau and his own order what happened in the bay in the moments after the board's men fired, and he never found language he was satisfied with, because language was built by people to describe things people did, and what he had watched was not a thing people did. He would say only that it was fast, and that it was cold, and that there was no anger in it anywhere, and that this was the part that stayed with him longest, that a man his order had cut and burned and poisoned and torn, and tried to freeze for 18 days answered all of it, at the top of his account, without a single motion that could be called rage. The board's men fired weapons rated to drop a warrior caste noble, and the young man's body had been keeping an account against exactly such things for 4 days, and it had built against the worst that could happen to it in this place, a thing that the worst could not stop. He moved once. He crossed the bay. And when it was over, the two plated men were down and breathing, and would live. Sale checked later. They lived. They even healed in the slow, ordinary way that things healed that had not been made by a killing world. And Eli Marsh stood among them in the flat, unending light off the planet, unmarked, unbreathing hard. His account topped out at last, and every muscle in his body armed to the exact and terrible height required to walk out of a place that would not stop trying to make him stop. He looked at Sale, pinned to the wall, unharmed, where he had been told to stand. "You stayed," Marsh said. There was something almost like surprise in it, the first surprise Sale had ever heard from him. "I told you to go and you stayed." "You told me to stand somewhere else," Sale said. His voice was not entirely steady, and he did not try to make it so. The wall was somewhere else. And Eli Marsh, 24 of his world's years old, a salvage-rigger who had crawled out of a cargo bay on a broken leg and told the clinic to treat someone else first, standing now in the wreckage of the most careful medicine in the Kell arm with an account against him, topped to the height of the thing that had tried to freeze him. Eli Marsh looked at the one physician who had told him true things the whole way and never once lifted a blade against him, and did a thing that no instrument in the ward recorded, and that Sale never entered in any report. He laughed, short, tired human without a grain of cruelty in it. "You're all right, Doc," he said. "You're all right. Now get out of the doorway. I'm going home." He walked out of the bay, and the Isafar order threw the whole weight of its certainty in front of him, and every piece of that weight became, the instant it touched him, one more thing his body had already decided to survive. Sale went with him. He told himself at the time that he went because he was the reconstructionist of record and it was his duty to observe the case to its end, and that was true, and it was also not why he went. He went because in 18 days he had learned that Eli Marsh was the only honest thing on the ward, and Sale Ording had spent 60 years being an honest physician in an order that was, he had begun to understand, a great deal less honest than it believed. And when the honest thing got up to leave, Sale found he could not stay behind with the rest. The board sealed the ring first. Sethric Valor was in the ward's control gallery by then, watching through the monitors, and he did the thing the powerful always did when a thing they owned began to leave. He closed the doors. Bulkheads dropped across the third ring's corridor, heavy pressure doors rated to hold against decompression and riot both, and the corridor ahead of the young man became a smooth blank wall of the order's best structural alloy. Marsh stopped in front of it. He did not strike it. Sale marked that, because it was the thing the reports would get wrong. Later in the retelling, they would say he tore through the ward in a fury, and there was no fury. There was never any fury. He looked at the sealed bulkhead the way a man looks at a stuck lid, with mild interest and no heat, and then he set his hands against it, flat at the seam, and he pushed. The bulkhead was rated to hold against decompression. It was not rated to hold against a body that had spent 4 days keeping an account against the attempt to stop it, and it gave, not shattered, not exploded. The retellings got that wrong too. It gave the way metal gives slowly, with a long groan of yielding structure, the seam parting under the flat, patient pressure of 2 human hands until there was a gap, and then a wider gap, and then enough. And Eli Marsh stepped through the ruined door into the next stretch of corridor, and did not look back at it. He opened a pressure bulkhead with his hands, Ian said, on the ward channel, in a voice that had stopped believing in laws several days before and had now stopped believing in the floor. Adept. He opened a rated pressure bulkhead with his hands. That's not muscle, doesn't the attachment alone, the bone would. The bone re-rated too, Del Maroon's voice came back, flat and old and past all surprise. You keep looking for the thing that should have broken. Nothing is going to break, child. That is the entire finding. 18 days ago we asked how far a grade 9 body would go when a place would not stop cutting it, and this is the answer, walking down the 3rd ring. It goes as far as the place makes it go, and the place made it go here. A pause. Stop narrating what he opens. Start counting how many doors the board is going to make him open before it understands that every door is a lesson, and he is a very quick study. The board made him open 4 more. Sale walked behind him through all of it, unharmed. The young man never once turned the smallest fraction of his account toward the physician at his back, and he watched Sethric Valor spend the order's certainty 1 bulkhead at a time. Each door dropped ahead of them. Each door the young man opened, cold and unhurried, with hands and once a shoulder, and each door he opened was reported on the ward channel in a study team's failing voice as a structure exceeded, a rating surpassed, a thing that could not be done being done in the flat, bright light of a corridor above the weather of Kell. And Sale understood, walking, that the administrator had made the same error the whole order had made from the first hour, only larger. He was still trying to stop the young man, and the young man's entire body was a machine for converting attempts to stop him into the strength required to not be stopped, and every sealed door was not an obstacle but a gift, a fresh entry on the account, a lesson the body took and answered by arming 1 increment higher. He's getting stronger as he walks, Asil said, watching the door readings climb. Each barrier is harder than the last, and he opens each one faster than the one before. The board thinks it's wearing him down. It's charging him up. By the time he reaches the dock, he'll be able to walk through the hull. It was the warden who ended it. Vol Thresholdcast had watched the whole thing from the control gallery, beside the administrator, silent, taking its notes as it had promised. And when the 5th bulkhead groaned open under 2 human hands and Eli Marsh stepped through it onto the ring that led to the transport dock, the warden of the Hazard Bureau turned to Sethric Valor and spoke, and Sale heard it on the open channel. Administrator, Kest said in the gray flat bureau tongue, you are going to stop closing doors now. The quarantine is board authority. The quarantine is void, Kest said. It went void the moment the subject exceeded the containment rating of this facility, which was 4 doors ago. I am invoking bureau precedence, which supersedes board authority in any case where an organism has become a hazard the facility cannot contain, and I am ruling, now, on the record, in my authority as threshold warden, that the subject in the 3rd ring is a hazard this facility cannot contain, has never been able to contain, and has been actively strengthening for 18 days in direct proportion to the facility's attempts to contain it. The flat eyes did not move. You wanted the ceiling, administrator. There is your ceiling, walking to the dock, and it is higher than your station's hull, and it is still rising, and it will go on rising for exactly as long as you keep giving it walls. The Bureau's protocol for an organism that grows stronger the more you contain it is not more containment. It has never been more containment. It is cessation. You stop. You give it nothing. You open every door between that man and his ship, and you let it leave, because the single most dangerous act available to this station right now is to make him survive one more thing. Kest turned from the administrator to the gallery's controls and put its own broad-plated hand on the door override, and Sale heard the bulkheads of the fifth ring cycle open, all of them, ahead of the young man, a clear path to the dock opening in the flat bright light. I am opening the doors. Every physician on this ward who understands what I have just said will help me open them. And everyone who does not is going to learn the lesson the two men in the bay learned, which is that this order does not get to decide when a grade 9 stops. It only gets to decide how strong he is when he does. There was a silence on the channel. And then, one by one, the doors of the Isafar Reclamation Ward began to open ahead of Eli Marsh, not the board's doors. The physicians, as the senior staff of the best medical house in the Kell Arm, made, each in turn, the calculation the warden had laid out, and reached the same end, and chose to stop being the thing that made the young man stronger. Otha Vresh opened the sixth ring from the Prime's own station. Asil cleared the dock approach. Del Maroon, from the scope suite, unsealed the last quarantine lock with a physician's override and said, on the channel, in his flat ancient voice, "Go home, young man. We have learned everything you came here to teach us, and a good deal we did not want to know, and there is nothing left in this place worth the price of one more door." Sethric Valor stood in the control gallery and watched his asset walk, unobstructed now, toward the transport dock, and made his last attempt to price a thing that had passed beyond price. He came down to the dock himself. Sale saw the tall slate-purple noble of the coastal houses step out onto the dock apron ahead of the young man, alone, without his plated men, because his plated men were in the bay learning to heal the slow, ordinary way, and Sethric had nothing left to put in front of the asset but himself and the certainty that had never once, in his whole life, failed to be the most powerful thing in the room. "Name your price," Sethric said. Eli Marsh stopped. The green ship sat behind the administrator, its dock still open, the transport that would carry the young man down and out and home, and between the young man and the ship stood the last certainty of the richest medical house in the Arm, and Marsh looked at him with the flat patient eyes that had, at the top of the account, finally spent all their patience and found underneath it only the cold. "I don't have a price," Marsh said. "That's the part you never got. The old careful one got it. The cold one got it. You never did. There's no number because it's not a thing I'm selling. It's a thing I am. You can't buy what my body does any more than you can buy the winter that made it." You could have had the whole story for free. A hurt man, patched up, walks out better than he came, and never a door opened that didn't need to be. That was the paper. That was the medicine. You wanted more than the medicine. You wanted to own the winter. He took a step, and Sethric Valor, noble of the coastal houses, most powerful thing in every room of his life, looked at the young man closing the distance and did the thing that 18 days of certainty had never prepared him to do. He stepped aside. Not because he chose to. Sale watched his face, and it was not a choice. It was the body's own older wisdom overriding the certainty at the last, the deep animal knowing that arrives in even the proudest thing when it stands in front of a predator and understands below thought that the next second belongs entirely to the predator and not at all to it. The administrator stepped aside, and Eli Marsh walked past him onto the dock, toward the ship, without hurrying, without a backward look, the way he had walked past everything the order had put in front of him for 18 days. At the ramp of the transport he stopped once and turned, and found Sale Ording in the flat bright light of the dock among the physicians who had opened the doors. "Doc," Marsh said. "Mr. Marsh." "When they write this up." The young man's voice was level again, the cold receding now that the last door was open and there was nothing left between him and home to survive. "And they will. Do me the one favor, tell it true. Not the way the green ship'll want it told, with me tearing the place apart in a rage. There wasn't any rage. You were there, you know. I was polite as long as polite was true, and when it stopped being true, I did one cold thing once and I went home. That's the whole of it. That's what my leg does. That's what all of me does. He set his hand on the ramp and the transport took his weight, and he was, for the first time in 18 days, on his way off the ward. You people came down to my world with a scale, and you put us near the top of it, and you thought the number meant something about how hard we were to kill. It doesn't. Anybody can be hard to kill. The number means something about how much the world had to throw at us before we stopped dying, and about what got left standing after. We're not the top of your scale because we're strong, Doc. We're the top of your scale because everything that wasn't cold enough to stop when it was over is already gone. The transport undocked at the middle of the 19th day, and Sale Orden stood at the dock's glass wall and watched it fall away toward the banded weather of Kell with the young man aboard. And behind him, the best medical house in the arm began slowly to understand what had happened to it. The ward was not wrecked. That was the first surprise, and it troubled the retellings more than anything, because a good story wanted a wrecked ward and there wasn't one. 6 pressure bulkheads stood open, their seams parted. A restraint field in the third-ring bay had burned out its emitters. 2 of the board's plated men lay in the very recovery cradle that had held Eli Marsh, healing the slow, ordinary way, and would walk again in a month with no lasting harm. That was the whole of the physical damage. A body from the top of the hazard index had spent 19 days inside the order's tightest containment, been cut and burned and poisoned and torn and nearly frozen, and had walked out through 6 raided doors, and had left behind it, for all of that, 2 bruised men and some parted metal and not one corpse. It had done, in the end, the least violence that would open the doors and no more, and it had done that violence once, cold, and gone home. Noted in the report exactly, Sale told Ian, who was writing the ward's account with hands that still were not steady. Exactly. No embellishment. He hurt 2 men who lived and he opened 6 doors and he left. If you make it larger than that to match how it felt, you will make him a monster, and he was not a monster. A monster would have been easier. A monster you could have shot. What walked out of this ward was a man from a hard world who stayed polite past all reason and then stopped, once, when politeness stopped being true. That distinction is the entire finding. Do not let the drama eat it. The threshold desk took the case away from the board that same day. Sale watched it happen in the Prime's office, which had become, in the last hours, less a physician's office than a courtroom. Warden Vole Thresholdcast laid its authority over the whole affair. The Bureau superseded the board in any matter of an uncontainable hazard, and the warden had ruled the subject uncontainable on the record, 4 doors before the end. And it took the study, the data, the samples, and the quarantine order itself into Bureau custody. And it did this in front of Sethric Vaylor, and the administrator did not stop it, because the certainty of the coastal houses had at last, on a dock apron with a predator walking past it, met the one thing it could not price, and it had not entirely come back. "The data is yours, Warden," Sethric said. He said it stiffly, the way the very proud say a thing they have decided to pretend was their idea. "The board has concluded, in any case, that the asset is not commercially recoverable." "The board has concluded correctly for once, and for the wrong reason," Kest said. "You believe it is not recoverable because it left. It was never recoverable, Administrator, because your histologist told you on the 7th day that the mechanism could not be extracted, and you did not believe him because you have spent your life in a house where everything could be bought, and you could not conceive of a thing that could not. There is no vial at the top of that man's account. There never was. What his body does, it does because of 4 billion years of a world that killed everything it could and kept only what would not stop. And you cannot buy that, and you cannot bottle it, and you cannot own it. And the 19 days you spent trying cost this ward 6 doors, 2 men, and every particle of the reputation your myosinth graft was built to protect. Because here is the finding the Bureau is going to publish, Administrator, over the board's objection. in language your licensees will read. The warden's flat eyes did not blink. The finest muscle reconstruction in the Concord was dismantled and eaten as scrap by an untreated Deathworld body in under a night, and the same body, when the Order tried to study how, improved itself past every containment the Order owned and walked home. That is not a footnote. That is the end of the sentence your product was the beginning of. Sethric Valor left on his green ship that evening, and the board's schedule of provocations went into Bureau Seal, and the study that was to have owned the winter became, instead, a hazard file. A long, careful, frightened document that the threshold desk would spend the next year turning into a revision of the Voral Index itself. Sale read the warden's preliminary finding before it went down to Isafar. Kest showed it to him, unasked, in the scope suite, the two of them alone among the instruments that had spent 19 days measuring a thing they were built to be unable to measure, and Sale read the gray, flat bureau language and understood that the young man had changed more than a ward. The finding did not reclassify Earth upward on the scale, as Sale had expected. It did something stranger, and the more he sat with it, worse for the Order's peace of mind. It proposed that the Voral Index had been measuring the wrong thing all along. The index rates a world by how likely its native life is to kill you, Kest said, watching Sale read. That is what the Order has always wanted to know before it made planetfall. How dangerous is the ground? And by that measure the young man's world is near the top, and everyone has always understood the number to mean the animals there are strong. But that is not what the number means, and this case proved it. His world's life is not, particle for particle, stronger than the middle grades. A warrior caste noble is larger and at rest harder. What his world's life has that the middle grades do not is this. The warden touched the finding, the single line it had come to show Sale. It does not have a maximum. It has no baseline it heals to and stops. Every other body in the Concord, injured, returns to what it was. His body, injured, returns to what it must become to survive the injury, and then keeps that and rates every future injury against a rising account, and the account has no top that belongs to the body. The top belongs to the world, to whatever is trying to end it, and so the danger of his world is not a fixed number the index can print. The danger is a slope, and the slope's steepness is set by how hard you push. Push a middle-grade world and you learn its strength. Push his world and you teach it yours, and it becomes that, plus a margin, and hands it back. The warden was quiet a moment. The Order has spent 2 centuries reading the index as a map of how strong the Deathworlds are. The finding is going to tell them it was always a map of how strong the Deathworlds will make themselves, given a reason, and that the reason, most often, has been us. Sale read the line twice, and set the finding down, and looked out through the scope suite's glass at the great banded face of Kell, and the flat bright light that never dimmed, and thought about a young man on a mining moon telling a clinic to treat someone else first, and about a leg opening a rated pressure door, and about the whole long chain that ran from the one to the other, every link of it a thing the Order had done in the certainty that it was helping. "We made him," Sale said. "That's what the finding says underneath. He came in with a crushed leg, and we handed him a graft and a starving and a core sample and a schedule of insults and a stasis cradle, and every one of them he grew past, and the growing past was us. The account that topped out on the dock, the strength that opened 6 doors, we built that. Increment by increment. Out of our best work and our best intentions and our need to understand a thing we should have left alone. If we had simply set his leg and fed him and sent him home on the 3rd day, he would have walked out a strong young man with a good scar, and the Order would never have known what his world's life can do when you push it, because we would not have pushed it." He looked at the warden. "The board wanted to own the winter. It couldn't. But we did something the board never managed, warden. We started one, in one body, in 19 days, and it walked home." "Yes," Kest said. "You did. And the Bureau is going to spend a long time making certain no ward ever does it again, because a ward can start a winter in one body, and a fleet, given the same certainty and the same reasons, could start one in a world. That is the finding the Order will not want to read, and it is the one that matters. You did not merely fail to heal a Deathworlder, Reconstructionist. You proved that the Deathworlds are not dangerous the way the Index says. They are dangerous the way a mirror is dangerous to a man who keeps hitting it. The harm comes back at exactly the strength you send in, and a little more, and they are very, very patient about sending it back cold. The Warden gathered its finding. He told you his leg was only practice. I have watched a great many hazards in this Bureau's service, and I have never once had one explain itself to me as plainly or as truthfully as that young man explained himself to your whole Order over and over from the theater to the dock, in words a larva could follow. It'll sort itself out. My leg was only practice. There's no price. You people were told Reconstructionist, every step, by him, in your own trade tongue. That will be in the finding too. Ottavresh disbanded the study formally on the 20th day, and released the ward's physicians from quarantine, and stood before her senior staff in the office where the 2 3-meter legs still hung on the wall, the improved and the ordinary, the one they had rebuilt, and the one they had cut to see if it was listening. And she did the thing that the very old and the very good do when they have presided over a great error, which is to name it without softening it. We are the finest reclamation ward in the Kell Arm, she said. That is not vanity, it is the record. We have given back function to clients from 200 worlds, and we have done it with grafts our Order spent 2 centuries perfecting, and we have been proud, and the pride was earned. And a salvage-rigger from a poor world came onto this ward with a crushed leg, and our finest work could not stay in his body for a single night, and everything we did after that, every clever intervention, every careful cruelty, every provocation the board bought and the study team executed made him, by exact increments, into the thing that opened our doors and went home. We were not defeated by a stronger body. We were defeated by our own inability to stop treating a thing that did not need our treatment. He told us on the first waking that it would sort itself out. It sorted itself out. Everything we added to that was the winter. She looked at each of them in turn, at Asil and Ian and Del Maroon and last and longest at Sale. There will be a review. I will not shield the ward from it, and I will not shield myself. But I will tell you now what I intend to say to the review so that you hear it from me first. The error was not medical. Our medicine was excellent. The error was that we could not conceive of a client we should not treat. And so we treated and treated and treated, until the treating became the injury, and the injury became the man who walked out. If this Order learns one thing from these 19 days, let it be the hardest thing for a house of healers to learn, that there are bodies in this galaxy for which the most skilled possible act of medicine is to set the bone, close the door, and get out of the way. The 2 plated men healed in the recovery cradle over the following weeks, and Sale saw to their care himself, and their healing taught him the last piece of it. They were not Deathworlders. They were bored men, of a sturdy middle-grade lineage the coastal houses favored for hard work, and when Eli Marsh had crossed the bay and done the one cold thing that opened the door, he had done it to them with a precision that Sale only fully understood watching them mend. He had not tried to end them. A body armed to the top of a lethal account, that had just been taught by the Order itself that the room meant to kill it, had crossed a bay to 2 armed men who had fired on it, and had put them down without a single injury that would not heal cracked plating, torn muscle, the ordinary damage of ordinary violence, the kind the Order patched every day. It would have cost him nothing to do more. The reading said so. The doors said so. He had chosen, at the top of the account, with every reason his world had ever given him to finish a thing that had tried to finish him, to do the least that would let him leave. He measured us, the elder of the 2 said to Sale, on the day he could speak again, watching the flat weather of Kell through the recovery glass. That's the part I can't put down. In the middle of all that, us firing, the field gone, him past everything, he measured us. Took exactly what he needed and not a gram more. I've done security for the house's 40 years. I've been in rooms with warrior cast on a blood debt. They don't measure. They can't. The rage takes the arithmetic away. That one had no rage to take anything away. He did us like a surgeon. He looked at Sale. Your ward tried to kill him to read a number. He knew it. And then he crossed a room to the two men who'd raised weapons on him, and he was more careful with us than we'd have been with him. What kind of thing is that? The kind the Index has always been trying to warn us about, Sale said, and always got wrong. We wrote the scale to say how dangerous. We should have written it to say how cold. He was never going to do more than the door required, because doing more is waste, and where he is from waste gets you killed, so it got bred out the same as the rage. What you met was not a weapon that spared you. It was a man who has never once in his life confused the amount of force a thing needs with the amount he happens to be able to bring. That is not mercy as your houses mean it. It is economy. And it is far more frightening than mercy, because mercy can be exhausted and economy cannot. He will always do exactly enough. To you, that day, exactly enough was a month in a cradle. Be grateful the door only asked for that much. The plated man was quiet for a while, healing the slow, ordinary way, the way everything healed that a killing world had not made. And then he said, he never even looked angry, and Sale said, no, and that was the whole of it. The finding the whole order would circle for a season and never improve on, delivered by a bored enforcer in a recovery cradle, watching the weather of a planet that was not his. Learning the thing the physicians and the histologists and the wardens had all learned the same expensive way, that the coldest thing in the galaxy is not the creature that wants to kill you. It is the one that doesn't want anything, and can, and decides precisely, not to. The Bureau debriefed Sale Orden on the 22nd day, and it was in that long cold session, more than any other, that he came to understand exactly how far the young man had gone before he stopped. Warden Kest ran it. In a bare bureau room the order had cleared for the purpose, with the ward's full record loaded, and a bureau adjutant taking the account in the gray, flat language that admitted no drama. They went through the 19 days in order: the theater, the first waking, the histology, the starving, the core sample, the board, the systemic response, the escalated schedule, the stasis, the doors. And at each step the warden asked Sale the same two questions. What did the instruments read, and what did the patient say? And what emerged, laid side by side, was a thing that made even Kest's flat voice go slow. That at every single step, the young man had told them, in plain trade tongue, exactly what his body was doing and what it would do next. And at every single step the instruments had confirmed it a watch or a day later, and at no point had the order believed the patient over the instruments until the instruments were opening under his hands. He was never mysterious, Sale said, near the end of it. That is the part the order will find hardest to accept, because a house of specialists would rather be beaten by a mystery than by a plain man it did not listen to. He explained himself completely from the first waking. It'll sort itself out. My leg's already working on it. It's got a plan, and the plan is older than your order. My leg was only practice. There's no price. Every word of it was true and literal and load-bearing, and we heard all of it as the folk belief of a client from a poor world, and we filed it under reassurance and went back to our machines. The machines told us the same thing eventually. They just told us in a language we respected, a watch too late to matter, and by then we had already done the next thing that made him worse. Sale looked at the warden. You want the lesson for the hazard record. Here is mine, and you may have it in my words. The death worlds are not dangerous because we cannot understand them. They are dangerous because we will not believe them, even when they are patiently, repeatedly, telling us the truth about themselves in words a larva could follow. He was not a puzzle we failed to solve. He was a man we failed to hear. The warden let that stand in the record, and then it showed Sale the top of the account. The Bureau had reconstructed it from the door readings and the field burnout and the final strength telemetry, Run through the models the hazard desk kept for exactly the question the board had wanted answered and had paid so dearly to get wrong. How far did it go? And the number, when Kest laid it out, was not the thing Sale had braced for. He had expected a figure of raw force, a strength reading, some multiple of a warrior caste noble. There was that, and it was large, and it was not the finding. The finding was the shape of the curve. Look at the slope in the last 3 doors, Kest said, and put it on the bare room's wall. The first bulkhead he opened on the 3rd ring took him 19 seconds, and he pushed at the structural limit of his tissue to do it. His body spent nearly everything it had to part that seam. The 6th door on the 5th ring took him under 4 seconds, and the telemetry says he opened it at a fraction of what he was then capable of. Between the first door and the last, across perhaps 11 minutes and 6 barriers, his body's output did not merely rise. It accelerated. Each barrier raised the account, and his whole system re-rated to the account plus a margin, and the margin itself grew, because the body had by then learned not only to survive the specific insults, but to anticipate the class of them. It stopped bracing against this door and began bracing against the idea of doors. By the 6th barrier, he was no longer answering the wall in front of him. He was answering every wall the order might yet put up in advance and holding capacity in reserve against them. The warden's flat eyes found Sale. And then he reached the dock and the walls stopped, and within the hour his telemetry began to fall, not to what he was on the 3rd ring. He will never be that again. The account does not refund. But the acceleration ceased the instant the order stopped giving him reasons, exactly as the plateau ceased the first time we left him alone. The curve did not have a natural top, reconstructionist. It had a natural cause, and the cause was us. And when the cause walked onto a ship and went home, the curve laid itself down and went quiet, the way it did on the 7th day, the way it will do on his world tonight while he sleeps and his body decides it is finally, for now, in a place that is not trying to make it stop. Sale looked at the curve for a long time, the shallow start, the accelerating middle, the sharp climb across the last 3 doors, and then the clean fall the instant the pushing ended. And he understood that he was looking at a portrait of his own order's error drawn in a young man's strength. There was never a ceiling to find, he said. The board spent a fortune looking for the top of him, and there wasn't one, because the top of him was always just a little higher than whatever we were willing to do. If we had been willing to do more, he would have become more. If we had brought a warship to that dock, his body would have found the account for a warship, given a few more minutes and a few more reasons, because that is the only arithmetic it knows, survive the worst, plus a margin, and let the enemy set the worst. We were not measuring him, Warden. We were dictating him. Every reading the board thought was data about his limits was really a confession about ours. Yes, Kest said. And that is why the finding will recommend that no facility of the Conquered ever again attempt to determine the ceiling of a grade 9 adaptive response by provocation, because the attempt creates the thing it purports to measure, and the only number you can ever get is the number of how far you yourself were prepared to go, which is a fact about the investigator, and a dangerous one to hand a body that treats every fact you give it as material. The warden closed the file. The Bureau is going to bury the board's strength telemetry, by the way, not to protect the order, to protect the galaxy from the temptation the board fell into. Because somewhere in the Conquered there is an admiral or a noble or a fool who, shown how strong one Deathworld body became in 19 days of being pushed, will not read it as a warning. He will read it as a recruiting poster. He will think, what if we could push 1,000 of them in the right direction at something other than us? And the Bureau exists, in the end, to make certain that thought is never permitted to become a program. Because a house of physicians nearly started a winter in one body by accident, and there are powers in this galaxy that would try to start one in a species on purpose, and they must never be allowed to learn how well it would work. The Order's Council convened on the 25th day, down on Isafar, and Sale Orden was called to testify. and he went down through the flat bright weather of Kel, and stood before the elders of the house that had made him, and told them the truth in the same plain words he had told the young man, and the truth cost the Icefar order a great deal. It cost the Myacinth graft first. The Bureau's finding, when it published, did not accuse the graft of any flaw. The graft was, by every measure, exactly as fine as 2 centuries of licensing had claimed. It simply recorded, in gray flat language, that the finest muscle reconstruction in the Concord had been received by an untreated Deathworld body as raw material and consumed in under a night, and no licensee reading that could quite unread it, and the graft that had been the Order's flagship became, within a season, a product the Order still sold and no longer boasted of. It cost the board its administrator, who did not fall so much as fade, the certainty of the coastal houses never fully returning after a dock apron on the ward above Kel. And it cost the Order its oldest and most comfortable belief, the belief, printed under every license and taught to every larva, that there was no body in the galaxy the Order's medicine could not improve, because improvement was the Order's whole art, and here at last was a body that improved itself past the Order's best the instant the Order touched it, and did it better, and did it for free, and walked home. "You are asking us to publish a finding," said the eldest of the council, a counselor so old her 4 eyes had gone the milk silver of near blindness. "That says our medicine is not merely unnecessary for such a body but actively harmful, that our finest act on a client like this is to do very little and leave. Do you understand what that does to a house of healers, reconstructionists? Our entire purpose is the conviction that we can always help. You are asking us to carve an exception into that conviction, and exceptions to a conviction have a way of growing." "I am asking you to publish the truth," Sale said, "because the young man published it to us for free over and over for 19 days, and we did not listen, and it cost us 6 doors and 2 men and the graft's good name, and it will cost the next ward more if they go in believing what we believed. Elder, our purpose is not the conviction that we can always help. That is our vanity, and it nearly started a winter. Our purpose is to help, and sometimes help is a graft and a closed wound and a client walking out grateful, and sometimes help is setting the bone and stepping back and letting a body far older and harder than our art do the thing it was built across 4 billion years to do. A physician who cannot tell those two apart is not a better healer for his conviction. He is a hazard with a blade and the best of intentions, and I have been that hazard, and so has this whole house, and the young man walked out of us alive only because he was polite enough and cold enough to do us the least harm that would open the door. We do not get to keep the vanity, Elder. We spent it. He spent it for us, and he was gracious about the spending. And the only thing we can do to be worth that grace is to write down exactly what he taught us, and make certain the next ward does not have to be taught it again in doors and men." The council published the finding. It took them the better part of a season to do it. A house does not carve an exception into its oldest conviction quickly, but they published it in the end, in the gray flat language the Bureau had drafted and the Order's elders had, line by grudging line, agreed they could not soften without lying. It went out under both seals, the medical orders and the hazard bureaus, to every ward and licensee and teaching hall in the Kel Arm, and it did the thing Sale had asked for and the eldest counselor had feared. It carved the exception, and the exception grew, the way she had said it would, though it grew in a direction she had not predicted and would, near the end of her long life, come quietly to approve of. It grew into a directive, and the directive changed how the Order taught its young. Sale Ording taught the new directive himself, in the seasons after, in the teaching wards of Icefar where he had been a larva 60 years before, because Oat-Havresh had asked him to, and because he found, to his own surprise, that he wanted to. He stood before ranks of young Asuni who had not yet held a blade, and who believed, as he had believed, as every larva believed, that there was no body the Order's medicine could not improve, and he taught them the case without naming the young man, because the young man had asked that the Bureau protect his name, and the Bureau had, and Sale taught it as the order now taught it, under the plain designation the directive had given it. The Isafar reversal, the case in which the finest reconstruction in the conquered was undone in a night by a body no one had thought to leave alone. He taught them the histology and the imaging, the graft consumed as feedstock, the systemic re-rating, the account with no ceiling of its own. He taught them the doors. And then he taught them the part the directive had put at its center, the part the order had bought at the price of its vanity, and he taught it in the young man's own words, because he had never found better ones and had stopped trying. There are bodies in this galaxy, Sale would tell them at the end in the flat bright light of the teaching ward, that do not heal to what they were. They heal to what they must become to survive what hurt them, and then they keep it, and they rate every future hurt against a rising account, and the account has no top that belongs to them. The top belongs to whatever pushes. If you are the thing that pushes, and a physician with a blade and a graft and the best intentions is very much a thing that pushes, then the strength you meet in such a body is not a fact about the body. It is a confession about you. It is exactly as high as you were willing to go, and a margin more, and the margin is the body's, and it is patient, and it is cold, and it will hand back precisely what you sent in, plus enough to make certain you cannot send it again. He would let that sit. Our art is improvement. It is a great art, and I have given my life to it, and I do not repent of it. But there are bodies for which the whole of our art, the finest thing we can do, the most skilled and the most kind, is to set the bone, feed them, close the door, and step back, because they carry inside them an older art than ours, written by a world that spent 4 billion years killing everything that would not learn it. And our improvement is, to that art, only one more thing to grow past. When you meet such a body, larvae, you will want to help it, because you are healers and helping is your nature. Master that nature, because the deepest help you can offer a body like that is the one thing hardest for us to give, to do less than you are able and let it be what it already is. Word of the young man came to Sale only once more, and it came sideways, the way true things often did. The Bureau kept a quiet watch on cases of interest, and Warden Kest, before it left the Kell arm for the next hazard the desk assigned it, sent Sale a single line off the watch record, unofficial, physician to physician, or as near to that as a warden came. It said that the salvage-rigger had reached his world and disembarked, and declined every offer the order and the Bureau made of compensation, of study, of care, of contact, and gone back to his guild, and taken up salvage again, and that the last entry the watch had bothered to record before it closed his file as a hazard that had removed itself, noted that he had gone back into a collapsed structure on a mining moon some months after his return to pull a trapped crewmate free, and had done it, and walked out on a leg that gave him no trouble at all. That was the whole of the entry. He had gone back into the exact kind of place that had crushed his leg and started the entire affair, without hesitation, to pull someone out, and it had cost him nothing, because the leg that had been practiced was long since finished, and the man it belonged to had never, at any point in 19 days or the life on either side of them, been anything other than what he had told the order he was, plainly, from the first waking. A man from a hard world who broke and knit and came back harder, and did the cold necessary thing once, when it was true, and no sooner, and went home. Sale kept the core sample. It was against protocol mildly, and no one moved to stop him. It was the 4mm core he had drawn himself on the 9th day, from the finished quadriceps, the sample that had woken the whole thing from a higher floor and taught the leg that even here it would be cut, the only piece of the young man that remained anywhere in the order's keeping, everything else having gone into Bureau seal or home on a transport. He kept it in the scope suite above the weather of Kell, sealed and inert, and now and then, in the seasons of teaching, he would put his eyes to it. It was only tissue now. That was the thing that stayed with him longest, longer than the doors and the burned-out field and the 2 men in the cradle. Under the scope, the core was quiet, dense, complex, threaded with the strange architecture Del Marun had never been able to bottle. More mitochondria than any human reference, sheathing laid tight as wire into rope, but quiet, ordinary, doing nothing, because there was nothing to answer. Separated from the man, from the account, from the rising cause, it was just a sliver of remarkable muscle that had stopped, the way everything the young man carried stopped the instant the world stopped pushing, and would not stir again for any instrument the order owned. The winter, taken out of the body that made it, was only cold tissue on a slide. You could not keep the winter. You could only stop causing it. Sale Orden looked at the sample often, in the years that were left to him, and he thought each time the same plain thing. And it was the thing he had learned in 19 days that the finest medical house in the arm had failed for 2 centuries to learn. And it was the thing the young man had told him for free, over and over, in words a larva could follow, while the order listened to its machines instead. They had gone down to a hard world with a scale, and they had measured its life, and they had put a number on it and thought the number meant strength. It had never meant strength. It had meant patience, the patience of a thing that would not stop, that would take whatever you did to it and grow past it and keep the growing, and do you the least harm that opened the door and go home, and go back into the dark the next week for someone else, and cost itself nothing, because everything in it that was not cold enough to stop when the stopping was done had died out 1 billion years before it was ever born. The order had brought its finest work to a body like that, and the body had eaten the work as scrap and improved itself past it in a night. And every clever thing the order did afterward to understand how had only made the body more of what it already was, until it walked out through 6 of the order's best doors without raising its voice. You could not improve such a body. You could not own it or bottle it or measure the top of it because it had no top of its own, only a cause, and the cause was always in the end you. The most you could do if you were wise, and the order had learned to be wise the expensive way, was set the bone and close the wound and feed it, and open the door yourself before it had to, and stand somewhere else, and let it be what 4 billion years of a killing world had already, patiently, coldly made it. And then get out of its way and let it walk home.